One day, an incredible number of towers began to appear all over the world. No one knew what happened or how it started. According to some people who were unlucky enough to be around, the filling of these towers was closely related to mythology, as if someone decided to copy some stories that people once invented and wrote down on paper. Some people were very happy to meet the characters from their favorite myths, and even have a chance to talk to them in reality, as if it were a real part of life and not a fairy tale. But for the rest of the population, it brought numerous troubles and many losses, because not all the heroes from those towers were kind and helpful. Dungeons and monsters began to appear more and more often near the territories of these mystical towers, and their number only grew with each passing day. And it was to protect the whole world from the influence of these mystical creatures that groups of hunters had to be formed to prevent them from destroying the human world. Selected people began to analyze and clear these dungeons, risking their lives for the sake of others because they wanted to bring peace to their land. And these defenders of humanity soon had their own name for the people and were quickly honored around the world and thanked for the lives they saved. All those who took this path and went down into the dungeon, forgetting about their own safety, were later called adventurers. As a child, a little boy always admired these adventurers and wanted to be like them and save the world from the attack of monsters from the towers. He admired it when heroes used their skills to protect people and became famous all over the world, receiving thousands of compliments and words of gratitude. It was so exciting for the young child that he was determined to become one of them in the future. In order to achieve his #1 goal, he studied like crazy and didn't let himself rest an extra minute because he wanted to be the best of the best. He spent a lot of time in various libraries, sitting there until they closed, and over time his knowledge of mana increased. The teenager wrote a lot of notes with important things in them, and over time, his understanding of the mutation also grew, and he became better and better. Several years passed, and the student read almost all the possible books on the subject in his country and gained a great deal of theoretical knowledge. It was the 27th written exam, and Han Zhong took first place this time, which he was very proud of, and now he had a ticket to his dream future. He managed to get into an academy where only the best students from the country are admitted, and he continued to study just as hard there to show the best results. I could not believe that very soon he would be even closer to fulfilling his most ambitious goal of his life and becoming an adventurer. If he continues to study hard, he can easily become one of the best and strongest adventurers and receive attention from all over the world. But later, Han Zhong received his second-year report and second semester ranking, where he received a rank of 274. There are obstacles that he will never be able to overcome even if he trains even harder because his body will not start moving better. He still didn't have the skills that the other adventurers had, and that's why Han Zhong decided to leave the Dream Academy and give up his own life goal. He forgot about his only dream, and very soon a few more years flew by. By that time, the other students were about to complete their 4th year at the academy. Unlike him, they did not give up their studies and still followed their dream because they wanted to help other people who were in trouble because of the tower monsters. And Han Zhong just started writing fictional stories about mythical creatures that walked through dungeons and towers around the world because that's all he had to do. There was a story about a swordsman who could cut through the horizon, and a hunter who spent his whole life in the Forest of Darkness and destroyed all enemies. Han Zhong wrote about a powerful creator of magic and invented new creatures for his works every time, because only in this way could he transfer himself to the life of his dreams, at least for a while. He described things that he could never have achieved in real life on his own, due to the lack of the necessary skills of an adventurer. The next story was at the stage of the final chapter and was almost complete, so the young man exhaled calmly as he looked at the almost finished work. Despite all this success, Han Zhong was not satisfied because he still wanted to become the same character from his works, but he still sat at his laptop keyboard and just wrote. However, every story will always have an ending, no matter how long it is and no matter how happy or positive the events are. Han Zhong decided to get some sleep and then finish the rest of the story because he was too tired after all those hours in front of the screen. Before going to bed, Han Zhong picked up the remote control and turned on the news on the TV, and he made himself comfortable on his bed. The country had a single sacred hero. Her name was Rachel, and she was told that she had completed her mission in the United States and was returning to Korea. Most of the towers have already been cleared, and the planet is even closer to a peaceful existence without any monsters hunting people. The guy looked at the adventurer with admiration while listening to all her world achievements and still wanted to be like her, just like in childhood. He was still tormented by the feeling that he would never be able to do this himself due to his lack of adventure skills, and these thoughts did not let him rest for a moment. Han Zhong was also sure that he had worked much harder for his dream than all the other students at his academy, but they were just lucky to have those damn skills. However, after a minute of reflection, the writer fell back on his pillow, trying to forget about these thoughts and at least sleep peacefully and not reproach himself. Later, the boy managed to fall asleep, and only dark light made its way into his room and lightly illuminated its walls. The world was looking for stories for the new towers that were still appearing around the world, but now it was more of a public concern. The world found a suitable setting for the tower's use and began to build new towers with a similar setting. And then later the world created the same tower, new and tall, with the same monsters that would attack the planet. There was a lot of noise in the room, and the guy only now remembered that the TV had been on since the night before, even though the sun was already shining outside. They talked about a very strange case. 5 new towers appeared in the world at the same time, despite the fact that the towers had already stopped progressing so actively. The title of one was called The Swordsman Cutting the Horizon, and the other was called The Devil's Mercenary. There was also a tower called the Black Divine Spear, and at this point the guy definitely woke up and looked at the TV screen while his heart was racing. He hurriedly threw off his blanket and threw his pillow aside, keeping his eyes on the news anchor and listening to every word he said. When they were finally able to achieve peace around the world, towers and dungeons began to appear again, and later 2 more towers were reported. In total, 7 new towers have already appeared, and the association even admitted that they would all be of the highest level, i.e. very dangerous. They said the names of the characters Han Zhong had invented, even though he didn't believe them and still thought he was just hearing things. The guy immediately jumped out of bed and ran to his laptop, and when he looked at the TV, he realized that there were too many similarities between his characters and those named in the news. Han Zhong only began to worry more, and on the laptop he saw something that was even harder to believe. All its characters disappeared, and all the stories, along with the original files stored in the root folder, were also destroyed. The news has again distracted and reported that the government is to announce tonight all the details of the latest developments and the 7 mysterious towers. The main priority should be to stabilize the situation and return the world to a more peaceful and calm life for the safety of the country's citizens. With each word he heard, Han Zhong became more and more convinced that he was only dreaming, and that he would wake up and sit down to write stories with his characters again. But a few minutes later, I heard that a novel called The Age of Destruction was chosen by the New World to create the tower. His personal story was used to build the very towers that have appeared around the world. The guy fell to the ground in shock, and still could not believe everything he had just read and seen. Allegedly, his novel was plagiarized because his name was written there, and he was called a unique author of stories and awarded the new title of Lord of the 7 Towers. Han Zhong's novel files disappeared, and the news reported the appearance of new towers named after his own characters. And he also gained access to a unique skill of the same special class, and gained the immersion ability. A person who had no talents and forgot about studying now has a skill of a unique class, and it's hard to believe. Han Zhong was overwhelmed with joy because with these abilities he would be able to become an adventurer, and his long-held dream could come true. But it was all a big mistake. He had drunk too much this time and was no longer aware of much. Besides, Han Zhong has already lost count of how many times he's gotten drunk to the point of memory loss in recent days. And all this because of this completely unnecessary skill that he tried his best to attack all these days and nights, but it was in vain. The attempt to activate the characteristics was too high. He failed every time he tried to activate this skill, and it did not give any result. Han Zhong's head ached from the number of conditions required to activate this special skill of a unique class, as it is simply impossible to fulfill them all at once. The writer used to be so happy when he received the skill and became an adventurer, but now he was not happy about all this news at all. The guy decided to distract himself with alcohol again and went to the store to buy a beer, but all the while he kept thinking about the immersion skill. All emotions with the nature of desire and test results, along with personality type and hope, he will have to deal with all of this to use his new power. The young man reached for the groceries, thinking of possible ways to deal with such a big dilemma. But while he was standing there, pensively choosing food, a girl came up to him and called Han Zhong, and he looked back. Her face was so surprised, and she couldn't believe she had met him in this store. Han Zhong remembered Saren from a long time ago and was happy to meet her again after several years of communication. Lee Saren was his neighbor and also a student at the academy where he had once studied, and she had a unique ice skating ability. The two of them became close while the boy was helping her with her studies at her mother's request, and now Lee Saren continues her studies at the same Han Chong Dream Academy. Although they hardly ever crossed paths during their internship because Lee Saren took a short sabbatical right after entering the university, and Han Zhong himself avoided her because of rumors about him. Now the girl said hello to an old friend whom she hadn't seen for a long time and missed him, because they used to meet several times a week. She shook hands with him and asked him about his personal life and why he came to the store. And then Saren smelled a strong odor of alcohol from him because he decided to get drunk in broad daylight, and one can only hope that it was not on an empty stomach at least. Only then did Lee Serene stop talking, and after a few seconds told him to eat a normal meal sometimes, and not just pick up some snacks in the stores. But Han Chong just laughed and now began to ask the girl about her progress at the academy. He changed the subject, but Lee Serin still answered him and nodded her head. The student also told him that Han Zhong is quite popular there and that his personality is often discussed by other students. The girl was told that the Heavenly Castle Guild had once tried to recruit him and that these analysts do not invite anyone. This is one of the strongest guilds in Korea and you can't get in with just good grades, so everyone knows who decided to reject such strong representatives. It was strange to hear about all this. Han Zhong was sure that everyone had forgotten this information long ago, and then Lee Serin changed the subject again and talked about something else. But the boy quickly said that he had bought everything he needed and that it was time to go home. And the story she told was one that Han Zhong never wanted to tell anyone. And this world, to which he no longer belonged, should not have bothered him in the slightest. When the guy walked on with the basket in his hands, the system informed him that he could feel the energy of Everton. In surprise, the former student of the academy threw the basket of food on the floor and froze in place, knowing something about this energy. This meant that there were imitators of the demons themselves somewhere nearby, and they would definitely not pass by and start attacking people. But Han Zhong still didn't know where they came from, and as he realized everything, sweat began to pour down his face out of fear. He remained in this terrible state for some time until Lee Serin came up to him and asked how he was feeling because of the young man's strange appearance. And while Han Zhong was trying to come up with an explanation for the whole thing, a man fell down in front of them, and they both noticed. Lee Serin realized that the man had fainted and was about to run to help him, but Han Zhong stopped her. He saw those demons gathered around the lifeless body of the man in the middle of the store's shelves and did not move away from him even a step. Later on, the Everton imitator ordered to call for bloody wolves, and then the young man saw an even stranger situation. He and the girl stood there very quietly and did not say a word until they saw a demonic portal open right in front of them. Inside, Serin and Han Zhong saw wolves that resembled demonic beasts and looked very evil. These wolves immediately attacked the people in the store, and they, in turn, began to run away from the predators and from the portal. It was hard to believe what they were seeing because a gate with demons had opened right in the middle of the shops, but people kept running away. This was the group that hated the 7 heroes and was ready to sacrifice absolutely everything to destroy them and achieve their goal. Then Han Zhong was even more surprised because this group of demon fans was part of one of his novels. The guy still couldn't recover from what he saw, but Serena told him that there were people there and they needed to be rescued as soon as possible. Only after all this, the girl remembered that he did not have the skills of an adventurer, and in this case he would not help. But then the young man said that he would distract all the wolves and let Saren lead the people to a safer place. He still didn't know how the newly acquired skill worked, but he wanted to do something, and this time he would definitely not run away from the problem. In the end, the boy faced the demon wolf directly, and it was standing right next to him while Han Zhong was only trembling in fear. Of course, the wolves were stronger than him, and it would have cost nothing to defeat this boy. Fortunately, he managed to escape and decided to look for at least some weapons for himself and found the right one pretty quickly. Han Zhong approached the sign outside the store and tried his best to pull it out of the ground. Literally at the last moment, he managed to do it, and when the wolf attacked, the young man defended himself with that piece of iron. The beast retreated, but several more wolves approached it, and the iron stick was already quite dented after the wolf had attacked it. It's unlikely that the improvised weapon will withstand another attack. Han Zhong didn't know what to do, and Saren wouldn't help him because she was busy protecting people. He will have to get out of this trap himself, and now it would be very helpful to use the immersion he received. Later on, everything had changed and the system issued a notification that the author was using the immersion skill. The world around him has really changed, and Han Zhong literally found himself inside his own novel. All these events that he had imagined over the past 2 years were now a reality, and all his invented characters were now standing right in front of his eyes. The young man knew absolutely all of them because he himself was the creator of this fictional world. When I turned my gaze, I saw the strongest warrior in the book, a swordsman who could cut through the horizon. Now he needed to survive, so Han Zhong decided to take his abilities for himself for a while and protect himself. The writer used his immersion skill, but the system reported a very high chance of self-destruction when activated due to a too high difference in strength. Now it was his last chance for survival, but it failed, which sent him into an even greater panic. The ruler of his own world tried to use this skill more than once, but nothing happened. Han Zhong began to think of a new plan and decided that he would try to use this skill on one of these 7 characters. Then the system allowed him to select a target to use the immersion skill. Now, at least, the young man has begun to understand how the scheme works, and all that remains is to remember what he once wrote on paper. Out of the top 7, they had to choose the character who would be able to save him and destroy the wolves. In just a few seconds, he named the person he was calling and to whom he was passing his skill, and after that, an aura appeared around the guy. After several unsuccessful attempts to apply the skill, he finally managed to successfully use it. All of these towers were a combination of the real world and myths, which could be explained by the example of a tower based on Greek mythology. Hercules could appear as its owner, and then all the events that occurred in his myths would become reality. And right now, the characters of his novel have their own towers around the world, as reported in the news. This means that all the people connected with them will now exist in the real world and will be able to protect the boy. Han Zhong looked around and saw even the background characters he had added to his creation. When the wolves had already surrounded him, the guy once again used his immersion skill and directed it at the right characters. Melon soldiers and an ordinary gatekeeper whose name no one will even remember, but all of them were mentioned in Han Chong's novel. The task of this guard was to defeat a large number of enemies with a small force. The system reported that this time there was enough information about the target and all the conditions required for the dive were met. After that, the unique skill was activated and Han Zhong was happy because now he just had to wait for the right moment and fight the beasts. The young man spent some time in front of the demonic wolves, hoping for a miracle, and soon it happened, as several of the beasts were thrown away from him. Han Chong sharply waved this iron sign and defended himself from the attack of the monsters standing nearby. Also, the effectiveness of the spear was increased and it received a new combat technique, after which the maneuvering skills were temporarily activated. Without further ado, the young man approached one of the wolves and killed it with a spear that he stuck inside. He was finished, and there were a few more left, but these wolves were afraid of Han Zhong and did not approach him as eagerly. On the contrary, they gradually backed down and soon ran away from him completely, whimpering pitifully all the while. But the rider was not going to leave them alive, so he took the handle of his new spear and aimed at the target. But now he was doubting himself, even though he knew that he could not miss his goal, because later help would come, and it would be even more difficult. Gathering all his courage in his fist, the boy decided to throw a spear at the fleeing beast, and mentally hoped that he would hit the mark. The wolf continued to run away from him, occasionally looking back, and he tried not to get caught by Han Chong's hot hand, but he was still running away too slowly. Meanwhile, Saren created her own unique world of ice using her own skills and continued to save people from demonic creatures. Luckily, it was over soon, and the girl asked if all the targets were safe. Although the people were scared, they survived and were unharmed thanks to her. After all that, Saren called them to follow her and said that it was time to get away from here. She needed to evacuate the citizens to a safe place. Then the girl was going to come to Youngmin's aid because she heard that he hadn't awakened his skills yet, but he should because he had been studying at the academy for some time. Saren fell silent and stopped in her tracks, and then wondered if her friend was okay. He was really fine, and at that moment he destroyed the last bloody wolf of Everton. Although he was tiered, he was not injured and defended himself. Only when he took a few deep breaths did he begin to hear surprised exclamations and applause because he had single-handedly overcome these demonic creatures. After that, the author of the novels turned off the immersion skill and returned to the real world. He didn't realize what had happened a few minutes ago because the whole fight had exhausted him so much that Han Zhong fell to the ground throwing the iron away. He was unable to stand on his feet but was very happy because he now knows how to use his unique skill, and that is the most important thing now. Now Han Chong had learned the technique of fighting and the muscles of his whole body would be used more efficiently, and also his body was not able to withstand such force and the forced increase caused a recoil. Only a few seconds later, the guy somehow got up, and his whole body was hurting even more. Now he could hardly move. Eventually, the young man fell to the ground again, but by then Saren had already approached him and asked if he was hurt, but his friend said he was fine. The girl was still worried about him because Han Zhong looked really terrible and could barely open his mouth. Eventually, the writer got up and sat down, and Saren recalled what they had said about him at the academy, namely that Han Zhong had no skills, and it was true. It was amazing that he was able to fight so well without his skills, and that he had defeated so many demonic creatures on his own. Han Zhong looked around and froze in place in disbelief because he had done it himself just a few minutes ago. However, the writer breathed a sigh of relief because it was all his dream, and he dreamed of similar skills possessed by adventurers around the world. On the verge of self-destruction and in direct danger, his body started moving on its own, and apparently the training at the academy was not in vain. And the unique immersion skill could also be used on secondary characters, which means that Han Chong will be able to borrow the power of people who are close to his level of strength. But there were some drawbacks because my body still hurt, and the recoil was very strong for its still quite modest capabilities. Saren still wasn't sure that her friend was okay, but he assured her otherwise, even though he knew now that not all battles would be able to use immersion, so he needed to become more resilient. Later, the guy returned home, where he barely made it after yesterday's shock, and now he was woken up by a loud phone call. The young man was lying on his bed and, without even looking at the caller, he dropped the call and enjoyed the silence again. When the phone rang for the second time, the guy couldn't stand it any longer and barely opened his eyes to look at the light screen. During this time, Saren also managed to write him a message, and it surprised Han Jung because his friend simply wrote words of apology for no one knows why. He didn't know for sure, but he thought of the worst-case scenario that could happen. He jumped out of bed and sleep finally let him go, after which he decided to test his guesses about what Saren had written to him. Because the young man stood up abruptly, his muscles hurt as suddenly and severely as if an electric shock had passed through them, and he fell back on his blanket. Later, Han Jong fell to the floor and managed to hit his head, which made it even more painful, and the young man dropped his phone. Then the guy finally looked at his phone screen for the second time and saw dozens of missed calls and a bunch of messages, although this was never the case before. The writer took up the challenge of not even knowing what was going on and then began to check all the notifications he had received. Saren apologized to him again, and then Han Jong read in the news that the students of the academy had saved all the people from the demonic beasts. She didn't want to tell anyone because she didn't like a lot of attention, but somehow it got to such a high point. Even though the day wasn't over, all the news was about it. Perhaps this is because monsters first appeared in the real world with people and not in dungeons as everyone is used to, which caused such a stir. He decided to call his girlfriend and realized that his life had begun to change, even though he had not done it on purpose and did not think about the possible consequences. He also read a comment from a woman who said that he had become a hero for her and her daughter, and after that the child wanted to become an adventurer herself. While he was reading message after message, new ones were still coming to him, distracting him from his comments. Most of the numbers were unknown to him, but he also saw a professor from the academy and his former instructor, all of whom wanted to meet him soon. Most of all, it was strange to see such messages from the instructor because Han Jung had never been interested in him before, and in fact he even mocked him. The girl wrote to him again and offered to buy him 10 meals as her apology and said he could choose something expensive. The young man agreed, and he actually got up and said he would think about it, but now he hangs up. After a while, his body began to return to normal and his muscles did not hurt as much as before, but the best part was that he had already understood how to use his unique skill. His lifelong dream could come true right now. Han Jong could finally become an adventurer and save the world, and he didn't want to delay it any longer. A little more time passed and he went outside where it was a warm and sunny day. After that, the writer got on a bus and went somewhere. All the while he was traveling, he was reading the news and came across an article about how one of the strongest adventurers was unable to enter the Master of the Sword Tower. An incredible number of human heroes set out to conquer these towers and tried to enter them to destroy them to the ground. The most successful of these adventurers were able to acquire unique skills that were highly valued in their circle, but not everyone was so lucky. Not everyone was the lucky one who managed to gain both new abilities and power over others. Not everyone managed to win the hearts of people and become real heroes for them, receiving an incredible amount of attention to their person every day. But now, the complexity of the towers has increased to incredible heights, and even those who were previously considered truly strong could not cope with what they encountered inside the tower. Despite all these failures, which involved hundreds or thousands of adventurers, the adventurers could not be stopped and attempts to conquer the towers did not stop. New groups and raids were created all the time. All these people knew they had no chance, but they kept trying, and Han Jong was reminded of masochists who just love to suffer. But most of them said that if you go to the dungeon just once, your life will become much better and you will sparkle with new colors. But the writer was really surprised that no one had ever entered the Swordmaster's tower, and even high-ranking adventurers had not reached this peak. Soon the boy saw the tower based on his idea from the novel, and he wanted to at least take a close look at his own creation in reality. At the next stop, Han Chong got off the bus and had to walk a few kilometers, and that's when he realized that he should train more and pay attention to sports. His legs could hardly hold him anymore, but luckily he made it to the main entrance of the tower from his novels. It was hard to move around, especially after yesterday, but he was grateful that he had at least reached this place alive and hadn't fallen on the way. The body still hurt and the current ran through the muscles, but the writer was incredibly happy to see his creation in front of his eyes, and it drowned out the pain. Han Chong came even closer and touched the building itself, after which the system informed him that he could feel the energy of all 7 heroes. It was very strange to see all these words and phrases in front of him, because he had only imagined it before and similar things could only exist for him in another reality. The young man enjoyed this moment until a man came up behind him and spoke to him. He had already realized that this was the first time this boy had been near the tower because he did not know the rules of behavior and then added that it was too dangerous to move anything. Saren confirmed that this was true because it is very easy to get inside the tower just by touching an object that belongs to her. That is why adventurers are very careful with this and do not neglect safety rules for their own good and warn others to be cautious. But Han Zhong reassured him and said that he would not be allowed to go there anyway, so he did not have to worry because he considered himself weak for such a task. At some point, he thought that it was even better because he would have had to run away anyway if he had been invited to the tower. But when the boy went back to the building, the system was informed that the true owner of the tower had been found. And then he also received an invitation from the owner of the tower, and at that moment his incredible journey began. He didn't even have to do anything to move to another place, and for some time the guy silently looked at everything around him, unable to say a word. By some miracle, he managed to find himself inside the tower itself, but everything around him was as calm as outside. However, this tower owner was not happy to see a stranger running around his property, and Han Zhong was very annoyed. It was all too strange, and the guy sitting on the conventional throne fell silent, watching the stranger. Judging by his mania, he was a completely ordinary person, but still he was bothering him and attracting too much attention. The owner of the tower realized that something was definitely wrong with this guy, but he did not notice any obvious signs of it because he was still looking at an ordinary person. He continued to watch the writer and thought about how he could learn more about this stranger and understand who he was. The idea came to him very quickly because he could simply call him inside and find out all the information he needed directly. So the sword that cuts the horizon invited Han Chong to the first floor of the Master Sword Tower and wanted to have a little talk with him. There was also a message that the monsters of the catastrophe class would wake up after a while, so the player had to get out of here before that happened, and there was an hour for that. It's strange that a person without the skills to attack got inside such a complex tower where even high-ranking adventurers could not get in. This had never happened before, and it was news. Han Zhong made so many efforts to get this opportunity, but it was all in vain. He was called an unfit adventurer. All doors were closed to him, and he only received this label because he got the last place in the practical exam. Even after awakening your unique immersion skill, there is no chance that you will be able to conquer such a difficult tower right away. Han Zhong realized that there was really zero chance of that happening, but then someone noticed him and started grumbling that he was standing there like a scarecrow and not moving. Han Zhong suddenly fell to the ground, and the owner of the tower said that he had lowered the difficulty and invited him here because he didn't want him to fly above the clouds. Then the head of the tower laughed at the boy because he allegedly thought he was just a loser who was lucky to get here, and these words offended Han Zhong. But he quickly forgot about these images because he heard about the tower's owner's ability to change its complexity. And he replied with the same mockery and arrogance that he could, because it was his own tower, and now Han Zhong was surprised by these words. The boy was silent for a couple of seconds and then said the name of the owner of the tower, who was named by Eden, who did not expect the stranger to know him. And now Han Zhong didn't know how to behave here at all, because this character who was talking to him might be slightly different from the one he had invented himself. Later, they got to talking, and Eden turned out to be a braggart, and thanks to Han Zhong, his creator, he soon gained popularity. The main character of the 7 heroes was written from Han Chong himself, who was a misfit, a guy who could hold a sword but had no mana talent, and only with the help of a teacher at the academy could it be awakened. But even here the boy was unlucky, unlike the story he was creating. Eden found his companions, and then went to the demon castle, and eventually the whole team defeated them. Then Eden became a hero respected and admired by the whole world, and it was because of these qualities that he was Han Zhong's favorite character. And who would have ever thought that it would be possible to talk to the main character from his own novel? But Eden was angry now because Han Zhong wasn't even listening to him anymore. In the end, he simply said that he had missed it and lowered the difficulty, so he would somehow get out of here, and finally wished the guy good luck. The dialogue ended very unexpectedly, and the guy would have liked to talk to him more, but instead, he was left alone. But there is no choice now, and in the end, if he had no chance at all, he would not have ended up here, so his hope was still alive. They really hadn't had much time to talk. Not even 10 minutes had passed, but now Han Zhong was thinking about how to get out of this place in the time he had left. Still, absolutely everything here is based on his own novel, so there must be some way out, and the creator knows all the nuances. You just have to use them. The writer walked a few more meters until he came across a dragon sitting in a tree. In 50 minutes, the monsters of the catastrophe will wake up, and if he doesn't act, he will die in his own work. And now Han Chong is just lucky that the dragon didn't notice him. Now it would be worthwhile to at least understand the place where he is now. So the guy began to look closely at the details that he himself had once described. The system notified that the player received information about his location while exploring the environment. and immediately after that began searching for records based on the information it received. It took a while, so the young man walked a few more meters, after which he stepped on something and only then looked down. He did not remember anything like this from his history. There were some pieces of wood scattered around, and it all confused him. When I looked closely, it reminded me of fragments of wooden swords, and it would not have been suitable for training, and the shape of the blade itself was very strange. But when the writer turned the wooden fragment in his hands, he saw an engraved inscription with Eden's name on it. Han Chong thought about it for a while, then smiled and began to understand. A moment later, he was told that he had found the key to Eden's broken sword, and the boy remembered everything. Now everything fell into place, and thus he was able to obtain information about the first floor of the Eden Tower. Then the guy started to tell me even more details about the first chapter of his story. It was a story about a place where a boy who had no talent at all nevertheless awakened his faith and discovered a skill. It was Eden's training ground, from which he practically never left because he devoted all his time and attention to practice in order to improve and achieve his goals. Information was collected about the Age of Destruction, which was described in the Awakening of Eden, and the system also obtained information about the area among the meadows in the Forest of Nightmares. But it was not known why this particular chapter, and Han Zhong only assumed that it was because of the reduced difficulty at this level, and he knew how to get out of here alive. Then Han Zhong grabbed one of Eden's swords and clutched it tightly in his hand, doubting himself. He did not know whether he could cope with what Eden experienced here in the novel, because even his training was weaker than that of the hero of the story. The boy sat among the meadows, and all these thoughts tormented him more and more, and he could not calm down. But at one point, he let go of that and told himself that he would just do everything in his power and somehow get out of here. The more fearful and self-doubting he is now, the less time he will have to fulfill his mission. So the young man took hold of the remains of Eden's sword and swung it with all his might, even though he looked unsteady. When the sword touched the ground, a spark ignited and the boy drew the tree even further along the ground. Only then did he stop, as if he didn't know what he had just seen, and took a closer look. Then Han Zhong saw exactly what he needed right then. It was a coconut fiber, and this plant belonged to the class of spiritual plants that can increase magical power by 1. Surprisingly, there were quite a few of these plants here, and usually they are very difficult to find, but here there were about 50 or more. But no one would ever think of eating this disgusting stuff, which tastes incredibly awful. In fact, this plant was very disgusting, even worse than it looked, and the boy almost threw up after biting off a small piece. The plant tasted very bitter, and how could he forget when he wrote that although it was a rare ingredient, it tasted incredibly awful. Han Zhong hated everything bitter, he just couldn't stand it, and now he has to eat this disgusting thing. I didn't want to do this at all, but there were less than 45 minutes left before all the monsters appeared. Despite his nausea, Han Zhong continued to chew on the plant because it was the only way he would have been able to get out of the first floor of the tower. It shouldn't matter what the plant tastes like, because if it doesn't eat it, it simply won't survive in this place. And he had less and less time, so he had to eat as many plants as possible while he still had time. He continued to eat, and at this rate another 30 minutes passed. Now there was very little time left before the monsters appeared. The writer did not remember how much he ate of this plant, perhaps 20 or 40, although it felt much more because he wanted to vomit. It seemed as if his guts were being ripped out, but fortunately, the amount of mana was also increasing, and in a matter of seconds it reached its maximum. Han Zhong literally held on with all his might to keep from throwing up, even though it was hard to hold back after so many magical plants. Eventually, he got the right amount of mana, and now he had to pour it into the sword, just like Eden had done. The owner of this tower watched the boy closely and was surprised that Han Zhong knew so much about these plants and ate them to increase his mana. Eden didn't know exactly how the boy knew about these plants, but he decided that he must have gotten the information about his tower from somewhere, because it was unlikely that he was just lucky. But then the tower master realized the absurdity of his thoughts because no one knew what was inside the tower. But then who was this guy? Now was the hardest and most important test, and after passing this last stage, he will be able to get out. This girl was a sorceress in a wealthy family in a small country, but in an unfortunate raid on demons, she lost all her partners and moved to the countryside. It was then that the girl met Eden, who was harming himself because he didn't know how to use mana. And at that moment, the wizard felt sorry to leave him to his fate. And it was this sorceress who helped him because she taught him how to control his own mana and channel it in the right direction. Stabilization did not take long, and feeling very happy, she decided to become a teacher in the village and was still teaching Eden. Then Han Zhong finally decided on the character, because a sorceress is the best option here, and immersion should work. After choosing the right character for himself, Han Zhong tried to recreate the immersion skill again. He focused all his attention on his strengths, and then began to use them. Then the boy shouted the name of the sorceress Dare, after which she appeared in his imagination, giving him strength. All the conditions of the Dare high-ranked mage immersion were met, and after a successful use of the skill, he was surrounded by a magical aura. Eden still kept his eyes on the newcomer, and was still trying to understand how this guy knew so much about the tower and how the tower owner remembered this energy after using his powers. It was very similar to his master's mana, but Eden still didn't know how this guy could do something like that. Now he needs to gradually purify the mana and direct it to the heart, and from the heart to the fingertips, and after full concentration, the mana began to move through the boy's body. When mana spreads throughout the body, it should be directed into the sword, but at that moment the system notified him of a severe lack of mana, and his magic got out of control. An abnormality was also found in the heart, and after that, the forced movement of the magician through the body caused abnormalities absolutely everywhere. Eden didn't know what to think because how did this young man know how to use mana and regain full control of it after that? And at that moment, the sword cutting the horizon told the boy that he could die, and Han Zhong himself knew that this was total self-destruction and was afraid of it. But he did not want to give up or run away and wait quietly somewhere for what was to happen because he had the opportunity to fight for his life right now. Leaving this life with all your hopes on your own strengths and skills will be much better and much more fun than just giving up and waiting. Now he had to give his life to his sword, but he managed to complete the mission and cleared the first floor of Eden's tower. However, he passed away and the sword that slices the horizon paid tribute to his sacrifice, and after that, the path and title of the owner of the 7 towers was unblocked. Meanwhile, someone had already gone live and talked about clearing the tower of the one who cuts the horizon, and the girl was talking enthusiastically with her subscribers. There were already many adventurers here who wanted to test their luck and endurance, and during these 2 weeks no one was even allowed inside the tower. She asked the audience if there was a hero who could enter the tower and stop the monsters from the dungeon, and then invited them to listen to the other adventurers. She approached other people, trying to interview them as well, and found another adventurer among the players. When this guy heard that he was considered a celebrity, he became very proud of himself and, of course, was not going to refuse an interview for a live broadcast. The presenter asked if anyone would get inside the tower after 2 weeks of its appearance in the world, but he immediately said that it was ridiculous to even think about it and impossible. Everyone has long realized that this tower is connected with swords, but the mystery behind it is still unknown to anyone, so it is impossible to get inside. It was obvious that the only way to clear this tower was to have a but he didn't get to finish what he was about to say because they were interrupted by an alert. It was reported that the Tower of the Horizon Cutting Sword was opened, and its first floor was successfully cleared by the adventurer. And a few seconds later, a dome or aura appeared around the tower, and the entrance to it was blocked while the reporters continued their filming for the broadcast. Everyone who heard this was really shocked because for 2 weeks, no one could approach the tower and get inside. And then this news. The reporter turned off the camera because she had nothing to say, so the broadcast was interrupted, and in 60 seconds the commercial was to begin. This was unlikely even if the adventurer had a certain attribute, but this is one of the last towers, so there could not have been a runner here. There was only one assumption about everything we saw, because no one could explain it any other way, except that a new and strong player among the adventurers had appeared. There was also a table of settings, and if they hurried, they would have time to interview this adventurer who had cleared the first floor of the tower at the entrance. They ran there as fast as they could when the director was immediately called to the entrance. When the girl got there, she saw the guy lying on the grass and thought he was unconscious. They were very surprised to see a man lying next to the tower, but then realized that he had just fallen asleep and was fine. He hadn't even woken up when she stepped on him, and it seemed to them that there was no one else here, so she decided to try to wake him up. But the other reporters and cameramen shouted at her to move faster, because at this rate they would not have time to interview her for their broadcast. They need to do their work and not be distracted, so the girl ran as fast as she could to them, leaving the boy behind. And just at that moment, the young man began to wake up, or simply talked in his sleep, remembering the sorceress Dare who helped him with her power. Eventually, Han Zhong finally woke up and opened his eyes, looking up at the sky, and only then realized that he was not in the tower, but next to it. He stood up and couldn't believe what he had done, because he had made it out, which meant that he had cleared the tower and overcome the first floor of the sword that cuts through the horizon. But then he was interrupted by a notification he received, and he didn't even know who it was, but someone was very unhappy that Han Zhong was sleeping so much because everyone had already left. He could only assume that he was talking to Eden, the owner of the tower, and was even more surprised that his character could speak outside the tower. To be precise, to speak inside, but Han Zhong did not fully understand Eden's answer. He continued to tell him something, but the boy still did not understand anything because Eden did not give a direct answer, only communicated in hints. But eventually, he stopped torturing Han Zhong and added that he could talk both inside and outside the tower, only to him. The young man's face was very surprised and embarrassed, and he only quietly repeated Eden's words. When he took a few seconds to think about it, he asked him why he was the only one who could do this. But for Eden, the question was too stupid. He would have liked to ask himself, but Han Zhong thought he should know because Eden was part of that tower, but it didn't seem to be the case. Although he did not know the answer to this question and could not tell him anything, the owner of the tower could tell him something else. The show that the guy put on inside the tower was very interesting and mesmerizing, and Eden enjoyed watching it every minute. Then he laughed out loud, but Han Qian realized that he would have been better off not hearing this annoying guy even in the tower or outside. Eden added later that he would never be bored with Han Zhong, and the young man realized that it was time for him to leave because he had no energy to talk to Eden. The writer stood up and said that he was very pleased to meet him, but that it was time to go home and they would see each other later. But it wasn't that simple, because Eden said he would follow his new friend and always be with him, and Han Zhong was not happy about this news. Zhong Min gave up very quickly, but it was really impossible to convince Eden otherwise because he had already decided that he was going with him. The owner of the tower was too stubborn, and now his daily life will become even more diverse and chaotic, and it would be nice if the problems ended there. Finally, the young man was at home, and of course the first thing he did was lie down on the bed and get some sleep, because he was very tired after the mission. Several long hours passed while Han Zhong lay in bed, and when he got up, he asked himself what time it was. Now, absolutely all the events that happened in the tower seemed like a dream, but there was something that proved the opposite, and he realized that it was far from a dream. His body was completely different than before he entered the Tower of Eden, because everything was full of mana and there was an aura around him. Han Chan was happy about this because he had been dreaming of becoming an adventurer and protecting the world for so long, so he immediately decided to test his skills. It turned out that his mana had increased sixfold, but Han Zhong didn't know how he managed to increase it so quickly, but it was very good news. Mana control, sword and spear skills, along with physical training and archery skills were added, and a total of 7 new skills were added to the arsenal. But Eden didn't let him rest either, because he was immediately hooked on how simple Han Zhong was, and how surprised he was by such a skill. However, the writer then asked me to warn him when he was going to speak, because anyone would be surprised if the heir spoke to them. But Eden just said that he had given him not only these skills and told him to check the characteristics window, and didn't care that the guy had just done it. Han Zhong did as he was told, and something new did appear, and it was something cool, because the writer couldn't take his eyes off it. Eden rewarded the boy with hero mana, which was exactly what the boy needed right now, and Eden was pleased with himself because this was the reaction he was expecting. The mana limit for him was removed permanently, and this was already a cheat because with the help of magic he can use the skill all the time without interruption. He also didn't have time to rest anymore, so Han Zhong decided that he would take up his old dream with a vengeance, even though Eden didn't understand what he was talking about. The writer only said that it was time for them to leave and did not explain anything else, as if he had not heard all these questions from the tower owner. He already has a lot on his plate and didn't want to waste his time. The young man decided to go to training immediately after clearing the first floor without even resting properly, but this is not surprising. It was his dream, and he finally had the opportunity to make it come true, so Han Zhong was going to test his fighting skills. He soon entered the first testing center to test his skills. However, as soon as the young man entered, someone noticed him and was not happy to see him in this place. The user received a notification about the warning of mana usage, and then Han Zhong stopped. When he was standing in the middle of the hall with people, something exploded right in front of his eyes, and Han Zhong remained standing still. Nothing terrible seemed to have happened because it was just a soda can that someone threw at the wall with all their might. But then the guy realized who he was dealing with because he heard a painfully familiar voice right next to him and that someone was mockingly greeting him. This familiar guy stood behind him and asked him with the same strange smile where he had been hiding from him all this time. It was Han Yukil, and the young man was still staring at him, not moving from his seat. Only then did Yukil come closer to the boy and slowly repeated the same words he had said earlier. Han Zhong had already realized that everything was very bad and why he had met in this place the very person he least wanted to see. Han Yukil was a former classmate of Jung Min's, and he also had a very rare skill, and because of this, he liked to mock his friend who did not have such abilities. The writer still did not move and looked with fear in his eyes at Yukil, who was getting closer and closer, and now the young man realized that the worst was about to begin. He was the one who mocked him in practice to assert himself because Han Zhong was weaker and easier to beat, so he often threw taunts at him. Yukil was scared only because he was smart, but it turned out that his classmate had nothing special at all except clumsiness. He was the center of attention when someone wanted to take the heat off and show off their strength, so Zhong Min often suffered from such people. Meanwhile, his classmate intimidated him, telling him not to even think about telling the teachers about what happened, because then it would be even worse. The young man was angry with him, but realized that he could not respond to him now and just had to endure his antics every day. But now he was more confident. Although he hadn't thought that we would meet so soon, maybe it was for the best. Yukil was about to beat him again, as if to remember the past, and he took Han Zhong by the collar while he stood there stiffly. He began to tease Han Zhong and repeat his own words because he was annoyed that this invertebrate still couldn't defend himself. People started to converge on the fight and noticed the uniforms of the Adventurers Academy and started talking again about how ungrateful and wild children are now. Now Yukil was thinking about his actions because it was important to him that Choi Pomchun did not find out about the fight. After these thoughts, the student of the academy threw the guy away from the wall, pretending that he would not touch him again. This time, Han Zhong was just lucky because there were too many witnesses and someone would have told Pomchun, so he let him go for the day. The guy felt uncomfortable afterwards and felt defeated, even though he had just been excited about his skills and wanted to practice. You just have to hold back, and that's all the writer was thinking about now, even though his body was trembling more and more. Now he has to concentrate on assessing his own skills, and if he starts fighting again, he will be disqualified and will have wasted his energy. However, Eden intervened and began to convince him otherwise, telling him not to act like a loser and to hit him at least once. Eden did not believe that this young man would just walk away and not even fight back, but it was much easier to talk than to act. Eventually, the gate opened for him and Han Zhong told him not to worry because he was not interested in losers like Yukil. Something else was much more important now, and that was that he needed to make his abilities known, not fight with that idiot. The retinal scan began and the user's information was immediately uploaded to the system. Soon after, the registration in the Academy's system was completed and he was welcomed to the test room. Now the boy will have to choose the difficulty of the test, and Han Zhong knew immediately which one he would choose for himself. The guy chose the lowest difficulty and Eden laughed at him that Han Zhong had no pride, but the system would edit everything to suit his abilities anyway. In a few seconds, we had information about its physical capabilities, and then the system called up the lightest F-class monster, Golbat. The young man had read about this class of monsters and heard a little about them, but now he needed to choose a weapon for this match. He wanted to choose a weapon that would help him test the difference in strength, so the conditions had to be the same as during his training at the academy. Since the student had used a sword then, he chose it this time and clicked on the screen. A few seconds passed, and the sword was already in his hands, feeling the same as it had a few years ago during the practical training. Now the boy's body felt very light, like a feather, and for a moment he thought he was using the immersion skill again. It was just incredibly wonderful, but now he most wanted to see for himself how much he had changed over the past few years. In fact, the fight was quite easy and the guy quickly managed to defeat the monster Golbat, and he did it in 3 seconds. The previous record was 32 seconds, and the hunting time has decreased, which has increased the difficulty from low to low. Zhongmin was incredibly happy to have broken his previous record of 29 seconds, and he thought it was a great performance. But it was inappropriate to rejoice at having defeated such an easy monster, so Eden ordered him to keep his cool for the rest of the test. But the young man didn't even think about relaxing and being too careless because he knew the rules and had to be very careful and attentive in this room. After this short conversation, another monster appeared between them. It was stronger and larger than Golbat and resembled an animal. All this was much easier than a few years ago when I was doing an internship at the academy and the former writer was so fascinated by it that he decided to go all the way. Meanwhile, Yukil was sitting outside and heard a loud noise that began to irritate him, and he didn't know what was going on. Next to him was Choi Pomchun, who was a zero-generation adventurer who cleared the tower of the thunder god Zeus and managed to gain 7 new skills. Finally, he managed to meet him and try to talk to him. So the younger man approached him and asked to watch videos of his fights because he wanted to become Pomchun's student. However, his dream mentor smilingly told him that it would be difficult to do so because he had just found the perfect candidate for his apprentice. Han Yukil was really surprised because he was one of the strongest students at the academy and it was quite difficult to find people like him, which is why he was confident in his own abilities. Then the young adventurer looked in the same direction as Pomchun and noticed this nerd Han, who was now fighting a monster. Pomchun seemed not to notice Yukil anymore and focused his attention on the other guy, after which he approached the microphone and spoke to him. The young man did not even expect to hear someone's voice from outside, but when he paid attention, he heard the man praising him. Yukil became fiercely jealous and angry that he had exchanged him for this weak fool and assured him that he would be a better student than this Han Zhong. The writer looked in the direction from which he heard the voice, and all this distracted him, and he did not understand why someone spoke to him. Pom Chun just smiled again and said that he was very curious and saw in him the potential of a strong adventurer. The user, meanwhile, was undergoing a survival test, needing to survive for 7 hours in an extreme cold environment, and it was a virtual room that could manipulate the senses. It is here that you can feel even an incredible threat to your life, which is why most people experience a fierce fear of the unknown during the test. Although it was really very cold, the boy held the sword in his hands and continued to think about how to defeat the monster in front of him. Unlike himself, who feels terrified and frightened, this monster looked completely calm in his own territory. Usually, all the people who passed this test just ran away because of fear. But this one is standing and there are two options. He is either stupid or very brave. Pom Chun wanted to see everything with his own eyes. He was curious to see what this guy was doing, so he pressed the button. Without taking his eyes off him, the mentor spoke and asked if he could hear him well. In front of them was a giant screen showing Han Zhong undergoing the test, and now he looked very surprised to hear the voice. Without further ado, Pom Chun told the boy to approach the monster, because in this way he would be able to spot the weaknesses and aim at them. At first, the young man listened to the man as if he were crazy because he did not even understand what he was talking about. He literally sends him to direct danger because you want him to approach the monster and tell him to do it right now at the moment of its attack. He didn't understand why, but he decided to take a chance and try to do what the man's voice said, so he rushed with his sword at the terrible beast. The young man swung his weapon several times to try to fend off the paws of this predator. Despite the fact that everything was happening very quickly and he was very focused, Han Zhong really noticed the wolf's weakness. He saw something on the back of the beast's neck and thought that this was the right place to aim. So far, he had no other options to defeat this wolf, so the young man decided to try at least this option. Han Zhong aimed and retreated a little further or have time to attack his opponent and strike him. He decided to trust the man's words and try to put all his strength into this blow to bring the beast down. So the guy did and concentrated on this particular punch to immobilize the enemy in one motion. It was over quickly, as it took only 4 minutes and 50 seconds to complete the hunt, and the system notified us that it was over. Pom Chun and other spectators supported him, loudly shouting that he was a good boy when he defeated the Iron Wolf. Yukil was still standing somewhere behind, but he was watching what was happening on the screen just as attentively, but he still did not believe that it was his classmate. Pom Chun heard what he was saying and approached Yukil, asking how he knew him. At first, the academy student tried to change the subject and avoid answering this question, saying only that he was slightly familiar with him. After the victory, the young man came out of the testing room and Eden laughed and said that for such a weakling, this training was enough for now. It sounded like both praise and mockery, but Han Zhong didn't know exactly what his new friend meant. It seemed that such a long pause of 2 years had weakened him greatly and that he would have to train a lot to use immersion more freely. Maybe one day it will even come to the point where the guy will be able to use his unique skill on Eden. All he hoped for, though he laughed at it himself, was that when he used the immersion with Eden, he wouldn't have this horrible character. Pom Chun, meanwhile, was standing next to the exit and stopped the young man, saying that he was the one who spoke to him in the room and then asked if Jong Min was a student at the academy. But the younger man was in no hurry to answer all his questions, but simply asked his own in response, because he did not even know who the man was. Pom Chun didn't know how to answer you. You identified yourself as an employee of the academy, and then Han Chun noticed his former classmate behind him. After that, the guy said that he used to attend classes at the academy, but then he had to take a short break. Han Chung admitted that the instructors at the academy did not teach him anything, although it was really strange for Pom Chun to hear this. I was surprised and wondered when they had such open and direct discrimination. Pom Chun was silent for a while, but then he told the truth that they had teachers at the academy who were not eager to do their job. In this way, he encouraged the boy to become his student and offered him to study with him personally. At this point, Yukil panicked because he did not believe that he would offer this nerd to take him under his wing and study with him. The most painful thing was that they chose this idiot and not him, because Yukil considered himself the best, or at least better than him. This boy's sword skills were much worse than his, and Yukil practiced every day and practiced tirelessly. He also had excellent hand-to-hand combat skills because he was also one of the best in this area and paid just as much attention to it. And even Yukil's javelin techniques were on top, because he picked up the spear almost every day and practiced in the gym. Then why did they choose not him, but someone who dropped out of school and now a professor like Pom Chun is offering him to become one of his students and teach him anything? Han Zhong was no less shocked than his former classmate, because hearing such words was really unexpected for him. Of course, the young man did not know who this man was and had never heard of him, but he did not want to pass up this offer either. Perhaps the one who introduced himself as an assistant to the academy was a master of all classes and a strong adventurer. After analyzing all of this, Han Chong politely refused, because the only reason he was stopped was that he would literally become a slave to Pom Chun and would have to pay a considerable amount of money. The older man realized that he simply did not trust him, and Han Zhong did not hide it, and openly said that this was the case. This was a fairly expected reaction, so his future mentor said that he would make him believe in his words sooner or later. The Zero-Generation Adventurer said that they would arrange a test and he would tell the guy himself what was best for him. Then the senior used the adventurer's eye skill and tried to get information about the user. The writer didn't have to do anything and just stood there while Pom Chun scanned him with his eyes. In fact, it looked like a mesmerizing process, and the guy did not take his eyes off his eyes. Then a notification appeared that someone else was trying to access the author's history. But the young man did not resist, and Pom Chun calmly entered his mind, intending to see what was going on and what the boy was like. He was very surprised when he realized that the magic here was quite ordinary, and it was hard to believe that this was the same guy who had just defeated the Iron Wolf. It was the first time he had ever met such a strange person in his life, but that was not the main thing for him at the moment. As much as I had already managed to get into the mind of this eccentric, I wanted to check out absolutely everything here that I could access. That's why Pom Chun once again used the adventurer's eye skill and began to scan Jung Min's abilities. Now the guy was feeling just terrible. He couldn't even breathe properly because of what Pom Chun was doing. With every passing second, it became even harder for him to breathe, and he did not understand why he was being treated so horribly. Han Zhong soon realized that the man had to be thrown out of there because he would not be able to hold on much longer and would suffocate. The hero's mana began to protect him after activation, and Han Zhong decided to use a counterattack while Pom Chun calmly wandered around and scanned his abilities. Everything was fine until the adventurer's eyes were reflected back at him with a blow, and everything turned against Pom Chun. This both made the man angry and made him realize that this child was definitely unusual and special. The young man fell to the ground, barely holding on with trembling hands, and only now the writer realized that it was Choi Pom Chung himself, the father of all adventurers. His magic was much stronger than the young man thought, and it even frightened him, as if the man were some kind of monster. Soon, the whole horror was over and he was relieved because Pom Chun finally let him go and stood in front of the young man. Even now, the mentor simply told him without any questions that he would become his student because such abilities need to be developed further, and he would help him with this. Now, Jong Min really didn't know what to say because the man's words sounded like an order, and for some reason he couldn't refuse. The boy could only ask why he was so eager to become his mentor, and the older man replied that it was actually a great honor. It was always like that, because if he tried harder, his talent grew and Yu-Kil stood behind him, quietly envying and angry with his peer. This boy was always standing in his way and making way for him, and Yu-Kil was incredibly annoyed by all of this because he was always focused on Han Zhong. And now it's happening again, because Pom Chun himself offered to become his teacher, while Yu-Kil was simply rejected right away and was not interested in him. They didn't talk for a long time after that, but Han Zhong finally agreed to attend his classes and went home, and when he got enough sleep, he sat down at the computer. Although the young man had a good rest, he was still incredibly tired and did not know what to hold on to. Now it seemed that he just needed to relax. Fortunately, Pom Chun himself needed time to prepare, so he suggested that his student rest for now and that once he started, he would beg for mercy. The coach told him that the training would not end even after the guy was gone, and then the man smiled. These words alone sent the young man's body into a cold sweat, but he decided to relax and just look for some information. The first news that caught my eye was about the academy's faculty, and Han Zhong read that absolutely all the professors had been fired from the faculty. It was all because of Pom Chun, and if he was really that influential, the young man was even glad that he was interested in his abilities and became his teacher. A few seconds passed until the author of the story discovered a fragment of the original story, and this notification startled Han Zhong with surprise. He jumped up and down in his chair and then thought about this strange fragment and decided to see what it was. The guy looked at the comments about the alchemist competition, and for some reason the participants were very unhappy with what was offered as the main prize. Eden was still sitting on his throne, reading this information himself, which surprised him. The guy was even silent for a while when he saw what he saw, and then exclaimed that the stone that is the prize is called the Bastion. Then Han Zhong read that it was a rare ore from the Age of Destruction, and it also materialized. If it's true, as Eden said, then the prize is really worth fighting for because the ancient fragment can be useful. And this bastion became a symbol that proved the existence of higher beings and deities. Even the imperial family highly valued and bought this stone every year as if it were a tradition. But he could only collect 30 kilograms at home, and he remembered that it was a very rare material in his own novel. But when Han Zhong smiled and said that this stone seemed quite ordinary in appearance, But Eden got nervous when the boy called it an ordinary stone, and it became the main prize for the competition because it was too valuable for that. But Jong Min knew it was because he had created it himself. Eden was interested in his answer because it meant that the young man could create potions, but the writer said that he had never been involved in this. Even then, the tower's owner said that they would soon begin hellish training because they needed to get this bastion at any cost. But Han Jong wasn't going to do it, especially since there was only a week left before the competition. But Eden didn't care because he wouldn't be the one to suffer anyway. There was nothing the boy could do against him except get angry, but this character didn't care about that anyway. Medicines, which are called potions, are those objects that can relieve a person of negative states. You can easily carry them with you, and the effect of this potion is very good, but there were some drawbacks. Learning how to make potions and obtain materials for their creation was a very difficult task, and alchemists were indeed becoming less and less numerous. In general, this is true. The guy agreed with this because it is really a very difficult thing to speak this potion. If there was a person who could easily create potions, even low-level ones, who would be the person any guild in the world would want to recruit? That's exactly how it was, but there was one more thing. However, the person who created the first potion did appear, and this task was successfully completed by a student of one of the alchemists. When the young man watched this video and tried to repeat something, he was shocked because he did not understand how it was possible to make something like this so easily by mixing a few ingredients. He studied imperial alchemy and created a first-level potion that helped to recover and relieve weakness and fatigue. And it was also said that it was created by a novice who did not understand alchemy, but borrowed knowledge from an expert. That day, Han Jong wanted to use immersion on a low-ranked alchemist, but he overlooked the fact that Eden was a workaholic and simply wouldn't give him even a minute's rest. The guy's head almost exploded from the amount of information, but he managed to get into the competition because there were not many other high-level participants. The writer looked at those standing next to him and suddenly recognized one person in the crowd. There stood Master Reynolds' son, Reynold, now calmly talking to the other participants in the competition. "I want to compete, but the other strongmen have already come." And Han Chong thought that no one would be interested in this unknown stone. But he forgot about the craft. They were the adventurers who entered the dungeons and towers to take away interesting and valuable materials to study for further use. Back then, these people brought all these items for those who made something useful out of them, because their work and hobby was crafting. Only 38 people were able to receive this title, and among them were only 8 of the best, who are called masters of their craft. Until now, the young man had been feeling fine, but now he felt as if he had come here in vain and it would not lead to anything good. But Eden said that if he had time to find it, he could read another book, but Han Jong was sick of it, so he tried not to listen to him and decided to drink another potion. When you picked up the small bottle and were about to drink its contents, someone called out to you and you looked back at the younger man. Reynold approached Jongmin and asked him about the potion, and then added that he had never seen the boy here before, and the kid replied that it was just a common potion to relieve fatigue. At first, Reynold was very annoyed that this guy didn't even dare to greet him, and then he asked with a disgruntled face if this potion was helping. Han Jong didn't say anything, and he looked very frightened, and judging by the look on his face, he definitely didn't belong to any group. They forbade him to participate in this competition, but Reynold was not told that even such stray dogs could enter the competition. Perhaps the guy was just lucky because the name of Reynold's band made him leave him, so he just said goodbye. Han Jong remained seated, but the words about the stray dog irritated him, and then the writer realized that he had to win at any cost. Eden understood his friend's feelings and supported him, saying that he needed to win no matter what it took. They were given 2 hours to take the necessary herbs and plants and prepare a potion from them. After the brief rules were announced, the competition began. All the contestants went to the stoves and started making potions. Even though they were new to the process, the ingredients were really good. They even installed an expensive mixing machine here, but Reynold was not so impressed because he had one just like it at home. While he was fumbling with gradients for his own potion, Reynold saw the boy he had approached the other day and Han Jong stood frozen in place. This made the master's son laugh because he needed to train earlier, not now in the middle of the competition, and he had to get the ingredients as soon as possible. Reynold called him a loser once again and then turned away from the guy with a laugh, so you decided to ignore him and not waste your time. The competition continued, and the builders were working in one of the premises. There was a magical circle of gravity here, and they also felt an incredibly strong concentration of mana in this place. The girl said that you were a very talented student if you could do this. Moreover, she knew that in ordinary gyms they would not do so many laps, because it simply does not make sense, and her husband was sure that he would like it. The girl asked Pom Chun what kind of person he was, and the master said that he had once been a student, but then took a break and later they met at a test. What impressed his mentor the most was that this guy was able to block his unique adventurer's eye skill because no one else could resist it. All this meant only that the guy's skills were at least equal to or even higher than his own. Chun said that he just wanted to take care of a student who was trying his best, and we called him the father of all adventurers. But it all sounded too arrogant. But then the man looked at his watch and remembered that he had a very important meeting scheduled for today. He said goodbye and asked them all to finish here as soon as possible, i.e., he just gave them orders and decided to run away. Then finally he added that they should do their job well, but the girl chased him away and told him to go away and not to bother. The competition continued with the participants trying their best to prepare a decent potion while Han Jung used his unique immersion skill. This time, his target is a creature named Aryan Papper, who will help him make a potion that will win the competition. She was a student of the great alchemist from the original novel, even though Aryan Papper did not become the best alchemist in history. But despite everything, she was unrivaled in controlling her mana, so the choice fell on her now. This girl was fully aware of her shortcomings and corrected them by reading 100 books every day and trying to become a better version of herself. In this way, she really improved her abilities and was soon rewarded with the opportunity to become a student of the greatest alchemist in history. After being allowed to take lessons from this alchemist, the girl was also given an ancestral potion directly into her hands. The guy was going to kill him right now, because in this way, he would be able to get the information he needed. The effect was felt immediately after taking this potion, and the system reported that information had appeared, but all this knowledge exceeded its limit. But he didn't have to worry about that, because the skill Eden gave him, i.e. the hero's mana, gave him the right amount of energy. The boy literally felt himself immersed in this world of knowledge and mysterious information, even though he did not know whether he would be able to remember everything. He continued to fall, but at some point he felt that the difference in strength was still too great, and then he flew down at a frantic speed. Although it was difficult and to some extent even painful, he needed to endure it if he wanted to get the information and win, so he strengthened the hero's mana skill to get even more energy. He had to suffer for a few more seconds, but then he acquired a new skill for a certain period of time called alchemy, after which his knowledge and skills in this area grew instantly. Eden watched with a smile and was pleased to see that all this energy was very different from what they had during their training. Maybe it was good and would really help him win, but the guy felt very strange using this terrible skill that made his head hurt. After a while, he finished and then realized that he would have failed if Eden hadn't made him train this last week before the competition. Taking a deep breath, the young man returned to his work, and now having full information about the potion, Han Chung decided to proceed with the task. At first, he just looked around and then ran as fast as he could to the shelves where the ingredients for the potion were supposed to be. However, he was disappointed because by the time he used immersion, everything had already been dismantled, and Eden was angry that they were late. But suddenly the young man noticed something and Eden was already excited, asking what he found there. However, Han Chong's words instantly disappointed him because the guy said that there were only poisonous plants and nothing else. If so, they had no choice but to make a poisonous potion, and would be awarded a few points if it was a poison capable of overwhelming a crowd of monsters at once. In the end, the guy found Aston Tilapia, a unique plant that can raise the body temperature when used, and if taken untreated, it will burn the vein. There was another unique and rare plant, Baryon, which turned into a film when heated and would be poisonous only if used internally. Eden tried to think of at least some way out of this situation and tried to sketch out different ideas, but the contestant assured him that everything would be fine. The boy took a small bowl to collect plants for himself and then walked as fast as he could to his surface. He also needed plants with a strong effect anyway, and these poisonous bushes were perfect. The young man went to his desk and decided to process them, and it had to be done right the first time. Absolutely all of his previous potions were nothing compared to what he had created now, and the boy was again grateful to Eden, who had trained him so much the whole week before the competition. And to be honest, no beginner would ever dare to take such a risk. He had to do it carefully, drop by drop, because each sip could destroy hundreds of lives. But he saw no other way for himself, so he continued and concentrated on his task. A master potion maker sat on a chair and carefully watched the contestants brewing medicine or poison, and Reynolds looked at each one carefully. He was outraged by the fact that most of the newcomers decided to stop at a simple recovery potion, or something similar, and no one wanted to risk winning. Only his son Reynold was on top and no one could catch up with him so far, so the father was calm about his son's win. But he also watched the others and later saw that there was a fool who did not even use the machine and did everything with his own hands. This is a really terrible decision in this contest because the time is limited, and thus he can miss absolutely everything and not have time to brew a complete potion. Reynolds took a closer look at this stranger, and then his heart sank for a moment. The guy was still trying to remove all the poison and transfer it to the previously purified water, and for this he needed mana to treat his hands again. Reynolds looked admiringly at this eccentric who was going to remove the poison himself, and it seemed that he was able to separate and enhance the effect of these plants. It is possible to complete this process, and theoretically, it is possible to complete it, but no one has ever managed to get to the end. But who taught them then? Reynolds knew perfectly well what would happen if he made even one mistake during the execution. The strength of this poison will increase dramatically, and the effect will spread not only here but throughout the city, or for several kilometers at least. It was really hard for him to believe that there was such a crazy person, so Reynolds started calling for the manager to stop the competition immediately. And then the competition really came to an end, and people started applauding when they heard that a unique class potion had just appeared. The screen showed the results of all the participants who took part in the competition, and then told about Han Jongmin, who created a new high-level potion. The young man stood silently in front of the audience and looked at the people a little embarrassed, and he did not know how to behave in such a situation. Despite all Reynolds' worries, this guy managed to accomplish his task and prepared a wonderful potion with a unique class of poison, and at first, the man himself did not believe what he saw. It seems that the winner had already been chosen, but the master's son Reynold, who was still preparing the potion, looked at the screens in surprise when the other winner was announced. The winner of this competition was a guy named Han Jong-min, who created a unique flame potion that can temporarily increase the amount of mana and resist fire by a certain percentage. It took less time than he thought, and after this achievement, the maximum number of skills he had increased, and the guy gained another unique ability as well as the amount of mana. However, while he was rejoicing in all that he had gained, Reynold, who was supposed to win, became very angry and attacked him, saying that the newcomer could never have created such a powerful potion. The master's son was so angry that he couldn't control himself and lost it, saying that the boy was a cheater and used forbidden things to win. However, his surprise was even greater when his father approached him and told him to get away from the winner of the contest. He had 100% confidence in his father and knew that he had to support him in this situation, but Reynolds, meanwhile, took the other side. However, he was not worried about the winner himself, but rather about his reputation, because his son was simply embarrassing him in front of the public with such actions, so his father told him to step away. But Reynold shouted that the boy was cheating while making the potion, and then his father asked him what he meant. But then Reynolds frowned and walked over to his son, angry that he had said such words, because a master can tell a fraud from a real alchemist. Reynold bowed to his father and apologized, but he refused to let him apologize to the winner of the competition, Han Jung, because he had been unfair to him. Stepping over his pride, Reynold turned to the young man and bowed and apologized, to which the writer nodded awkwardly. Reynolds himself said that his son was too rude and aggressive, but Han Jong again told him that everything was fine and he was not angry. Then the master turned to the main one and said that he had been watching the younger one closely, and the alchemist added that the participant had very good mana control, so he asked who had taught him. Han Jong was quiet for a moment and then laughed slightly, saying that he had studied on his own and had no teacher. Reynolds and his son were really surprised after hearing these words, because a newcomer, and a self-taught one at that, could not possibly be so good at his skills. While they were talking, the host approached Han Jong and asked the winner to come up on stage. Reynold still felt terrible about what had happened, and Han Jong left them, following the host to the stage. Who would have ever thought that such a small country would have such an incredible talent, and I must admit that this guy is very promising and has a great future. The son stood next to his father and did not say a word or look into Reynolds' eyes, but then he turned to the boy himself. Reynold thought that his father would scold him again and start shouting, but the master put his hand on his son's shoulder and praised him, saying that he had done a good job. That's when Reynold finally looked up at him and promised his father that he would try even harder after they got home. After the winner of the alchemist competition, it's time to start the award ceremony, and the prizes will now be given out to the winners. The first place was, of course, taken by the contestant Han Jong-min, and he was to be awarded by the father of all adventurers, Choi Pom-chun. And then the young man was surprised to hear the name of the master himself. The old man joyfully approached the boy and handed him the winner's prize, and quietly asked him how he got to this alchemy competition. The young man didn't even take his reward from his hands right away, because he was shocked to see Choi Pom-chun there and felt a little embarrassed. The ceremony came to an end, and the boy finally removed his pimple, after which the master invited him to talk over a cup of coffee, and they sat down at a table. Later, the boy told Choi Pom-chun that he had entered the competition only for this stone, and that he also knew how to brew potions. Of course, the master immediately inquired about the teacher of this young alchemist, but Han Chong said that he had studied on his own and was indeed indebted to him for this unique stone. This young boy has never ceased to amaze him, for the master had no idea that he could do such a thing and create such a good potion. Then the father of all adventurers asked the younger man if he had ever belonged to a guild before becoming his apprentice. But even here, the man said no. Choi Pom-chun had already realized that these questions would lead nowhere, so he decided to change the subject and asked about the stone that the boy had received as a reward for winning the competition. Han Chong immediately blossomed when he started talking about the stone that may look ordinary but is actually a very valuable ore, and the boy said that the master would also be surprised. In general, the former writer did not want to seem impudent or rude to him, but he still wanted to ask if he knew someone. Han Chong asked if the man knew a person who would stand higher than an ordinary artisan, although the pyramid was known to everyone, and only the masters stood after them. But the old man immediately told him that there was no chance that any blacksmith could make something worthy of this stone. But the young man said that it was not a difficult stone at all, and he could check it himself with the eyes of an adventurer. However, Choi Pom-chun took it as if the young man wanted to force him to use such a unique skill for something stupid and simply laughed in response. But the younger ones begged him so sincerely and persistently that it became more and more difficult to refuse him. In the end, the master simply said that no matter how much you look at it, a stone will be a stone and there is no peculiarity in it. Eventually, the old man agreed to test the boy's prize with his unique skill, then used his adventurer's eyes and looked at the stone. Then the information about this ore changed, and only then did the adventurer's eyes see the information hidden from others. After that, the mana required for the application increased dramatically, and the boy continued to silently watch Choi Pom-chun as he scanned the stone. He discovered that this ore was indeed rare, and could also enhance mana storage and concentration, and it was a mineral that hid its owner and could only be possessed by the worthy. It was really strange because I had never seen ore of such a unique level before, and it became known that it was a mineral that hides its owner. Even the organizers of the competition said that it was just an unknown stone. Choi Pom-chun would like to ask the younger boy how he realized the unique possibilities of this ore, but he realized that he would probably not get an answer. Meanwhile, Han Jong continued to watch the master, and he felt uncomfortable when he fell silent and just looked at him with the gaze of a predator. But he was just watching and nothing else, watching how much this kid would grow in the future and how successful he would become later. The craftsman sighed and handed him the stone, then remembered the boy's question about whether he knew any good blacksmiths who could help with the product. How the guy's eyes lit up when the master told him that he would have to wait only a month and he would pass this rare ore to a professional who would help. Pom-chun told his student to rest before the infernal training, but he decided to go to some alchemist competitions if he was so bored. He could just go out with his friends instead of hanging around here. But the conversation about the guy's friends somehow touched him because he had never even thought about something like that, at least not recently, at which point their dialogue ended and the master got up, saying that he had a hell of a training session to prepare, but still insisted that the student rest at least a little beforehand. Then the old man left and left the young man, and Han Jong thought about the fact that he hadn't seen his friends for a long time and hadn't even corresponded with them. Even now, he doubted whether he could actually do it because he had devoted all his energy to other activities in recent years. 2 years have passed since the writer sat down to write his stories and continued to write without even thinking about his friends and acquaintances, and only the words of this old man made him think about it. Han Jong continued to stand there, looking up at the sky and thinking about the past years, when suddenly his phone rang and it turned out to be Tae-min. But this call was too unexpected and did not even scare the guy because he was not ready to meet, and even talk now it became difficult. Then Han Jong started to panic because he didn't know what to do. He couldn't pick up the phone, and it wasn't the best idea to ignore his former friend either. But what a surprise it was when the boy heard a very familiar melody next to him. He had only to turn his eyes somewhere to the side and his eyes met his. Then for some time the two acquaintances stared at each other in silence. In fact, neither of them expected such a spontaneous meeting, and Han Jong was getting more and more nervous, but now there was no escape because they were sitting across from each other. It's been a long time since they've sat in a cafe like this, and it was a real coincidence that they both decided to come here at this time. This guy's name was Kang Tae-min, and he held a leading position in the academy. Whether it was the first or the second, Han Chong was not sure. From the moment he entered the academy, he showed incredibly good results in all disciplines. This guy had a lot of talents, and the most prominent among them was swordplay. Han Jong admired his friend and knew that his skills were on the same level as A-class dungeons, and this always impressed him and encouraged him to try harder. Then Tae-min said that the chat room went into chaos when he told them that he was having lunch with Han Jong, and everyone became jealous of him and his friend laughed awkwardly. And then Tae-ming added that Yuna was going to come here very soon because she had written to him about it right away. Then the guy started to get even more nervous, but his friend told him that the girl was not far from here and that's why she wanted to come over. There was really nothing left, but the writer really didn't think he would meet them so soon. He was more worried about Yuna and was sure that she would be angry. She was the one who helped him cope with his problems at the academy, and Yuna, Tae-min, and Han Jong spent all their time together during their studies. And this girl was always there to support him, and if it wasn't for her, he would have had a very hard time during his practice. Then Taemin said that it hurt her a lot when he stopped contacting her and seemed to disappear from their lives, and Han Jong was surprised but also uncomfortable to hear that. Then his friend looked at the phone screen and read a message from Yuna that she was almost there, so Taeming asked him to tell him where he had been. But it was uneasy because the young man felt the presence of Everton and was tasked with freeing the man from the curse, after which he would be rewarded with information about Everton. No matter how much he wanted to stay here, the young man could not think of anything else but the task that had come to him. He was really uncomfortable and feeling terrible right now, but he hadn't noticed any obvious reasons for that yet. At the same time, Taeming approached the boy and began to talk to him about something because time was running out. The author of the story felt a distortion, and Han Jong told him that he also felt it, but the feeling was too familiar. A few seconds passed before the cafe door opened, and the aura they both felt became even closer and more powerful. She was coming here, and then the boys stood up as if prepared for a fight, even though they did not know what to expect. Eventually, they noticed a girl in front of them, and Yuna said hello to Jungmin, who hadn't seen her for so long and missed him so much. In fact, it was not her that the boys expected to see here, because now it meant that it was their friend who was cursed, and that she needed to be saved from that curse. The guy recalled the days he spent at the academy, when he literally overwhelmed himself with books and notes and tried to learn as much as he could and did not stop working. There were a lot of rumors about him throughout the academy because the students knew that he had won first place in the written exam again, but he hadn't yet developed the skill, and they made fun of him for it. No matter how hard he tried not to pay attention to it, this environment was there every day when he entered the academy, so he could not forget about it. At the moment when Han Jong passed by the company of these three, he pushed one of them, and of course this guy didn't like it at all, and now it was an excuse to bully him again. When the young man was approaching the stairs, this guy came up behind him and tripped him, which caused Han Jong to stumble. It was completely unexpected, and unexpectedly for him, the young man flew down the stairs, scattering all his notes and other papers all over the stairs, and he himself was badly injured. They kept laughing at him and calling him an idiot who couldn't even dodge a footstep, and if so, how was he going to become an adventurer and save the lives of others? Because of his character, he could not defend himself and was afraid to say a word to those who insulted him, but he was lucky to have a friend who always defended him. While Han Jong was trying to get up from the floor, Yoon ordered them to apologize to the boy immediately. If they are going to discuss him behind his back, they should just shut up because it looks pathetic, because at least this guy is studying normally, unlike those dumbasses. But hearing such words in their direction, this company of three idiots naturally started to get angry with her. But the other two began to calm Yu-Kil down. After all, Yuna was the headmaster of Heavenly Castle, but the boy didn't care about any of that right now. Then the girl smiled and sent him away because she knew that they would not approach her like that, and even if they dared, she would fight back. The company left, and Yuna turned to Han Jong, after which she held out her hand and asked him if he was okay and if he had already had lunch. The guy stretched out his hand to meet you, and you felt very surprised because you didn't know why she would even defend such a loser. And as for lunch, Yuna said she had a bet with Tae-min, and he lost. So the girl offered to go to him and tell him to buy food for both of them since she had already won. During this incredibly difficult time for Han Jong, when everyone was laughing at him and spreading rumors, Yuna became his first and true friend, someone he could trust and who always protected him. She and Tae-min were famous throughout the academy and were both respected and loved. However, Jong-min's suffering did not end there, because then people started laughing at him for being such a loser and hanging out with the best students at the academy. He was often harassed by others, but the situation really changed because now he was not alone, and for every mockery these fools got a beating. Yuna was extremely annoyed that they were bullying this guy just because he was unable to awaken the adventurer skill, so she stood up for him. Of course, fights in classrooms were forbidden, but she couldn't just stand by because the teachers told them to keep quiet or it would only get worse next time. She used sparring and practical lessons to stop those who insulted Han Jong, which made him feel grateful and guilty for causing so much trouble. Eventually, a group of friends gathered around the table, but the girl noticed that the two were very nervous and asked what was wrong. However, Tae-min checked her and said that she didn't look very healthy last time, as if she was better, but Yuna assured him that the doctor had said she was improving. At the same time, Jong-min asked what had happened to her recently. He was confused about where the curse came from and asked if she had gone to any strange places these days. And the girl could not remember anything like that because she was just at the academy preparing for a tour of the dungeon and was asked to check everything. And it was a completely normal test, so nothing bad could happen, especially since the professors were also with them. The dungeon the girl was assigned to check out was completely ordinary. Just like the others she had gone to before, there was nothing special about it except that it was new. Yuna walked further and looked up at the area more closely. And everything was fine until she went deeper into the cave and saw a red spot on the stone, and of course it confused her. She lightly touched the liquid with her hand, and then it all started. It wasn't an accident that she stumbled upon. It was all set up and Yuna was just trapped in the curse. She had to stay like that for a few seconds, but when she was able to take a step back and fell to the ground, she realized that it was just an illusion. Then the other adventurers came up to her and called her, because they had almost finished the test, and at that moment she tried not to think about what had happened. She joined the rest of the group and soon joined the whole team of adventurers. After that, they left the dungeon and that was the end of the story. Although there was nothing too surprising here, because it is known that there are dungeons with traps that cause illusions. And Yuna thought it was just one of those dungeons, so she decided to just dismiss it as a common trap. But in reality, it was much worse than she could have imagined, because Yuna's mana was now in complete chaos due to the curse. But the girl laughed again and said that she had stopped scaring her and added once again that she was fine, just as the doctor said. She probably just didn't want to admit that something worse could have happened, but now Jungmin needs to do something about it, so he tried to talk to her again. The young man said that Tae-ming was right and that things should never be left as they are, and then said that it was necessary to determine what the problem was. But Yuna waved her hands in the air and said she didn't want to bother them after such a long separation, even though Jungmin assured her it wouldn't take long and she just needed to sit for a while. Eventually, the boy began to use his skill with his eyes closed and a magical aura began to accumulate around him. Both Tae-ming and Yuna were surprised to see the boy because they both knew that he hadn't had any awakened skills since he entered the academy. But now they saw something completely different, and the light radiating from Jungmin's aura was a healing element. Everton was an organization of those who worshipped demons, and therefore they could borrow power from these demons to curse people, and in such cases, it was necessary to save the victim before it got worse. In this situation, his mana turned into divine energy that helps to heal a person from the opposite force. The immersion was also successfully used on the younger priest Esther, and then this priest blessed Han-chan by giving part of his energy. Now the young man saw no other option but to use his divine energy to help Yuna. They were very lucky that the curse of the demons had not yet gained enough power to work, and although he was a junior priest, this power should be enough to heal. Jungmin allegedly delayed the process because he was a little afraid and did not know whether he would be able to cope, but he could not wait long and the writer began to heal. In the end, Yuna agreed because all this convinced her of the curse, and she silently watched what was happening around her because it was all mesmerizing. Then her friend said that now she would have to be patient for a while because it might hurt for a while, but it would help to get rid of the curse. It took only a few seconds to gather the mana and release it on Yuna, and the girl felt the strong influence of the light energy. It was a strange feeling because she was well aware that this energy that distorted the mana immediately disappeared and she felt better. After this procedure, Yuna and Tae-ming began to ask the guy questions about how he did it and what kind of skill it was. But Han-jong only said that the two of them had helped him so much and he wanted to do something in return, and now this service is the only way to repay them. Yuna added that she had heard rumors about Han-jong, but his skill was even more impressive. But now, it was hard for him to explain what they were asking. But it didn't matter anymore, because the young man had been waiting for so long to wake up, and now it finally happened. But Tae-ming definitely didn't calculate his strength when he started shaking him by the shoulders. Yuna herself was very pleased that her friend had received his training and now knew how to use it, although she always believed that sooner or later he would succeed. But now, they wanted Han-jong's autograph, and Tae-min immediately asked about the contract after graduation and whether his friend was going to return to the academy. But Jong-min said with a smile that he was going to quit his studies because he had a master who would give him individual and intensive lessons. This made them both angry and happy, and even more curious to know who this master was. They were giving him trouble, but Han-jong couldn't tell them yet because they wouldn't believe him if he said that Choi Pom-chun was his mentor. Later, the young man apologized for not getting in touch with them for so long and called them his closest friends, whom he missed. Although he thought that Yuna would be angry, she smiled back and said that she was very happy to see him healthy and happy. And Tae-ming wasn't angry because so many things had already happened. But then the guy asked him to call him all the time and not to disappear for such a long time. Of course, Jungmin agreed and said he would contact them more often and added that he was very happy to have such an unexpected meeting. They were in no hurry to go home, so they went out and had fun. And during this time, Han-jong got very tired. Sitting in a bar, the group ordered a beer and continued to have fun and discuss everything that had happened to them over the past 2 years without seeing each other. Then they went to the toy arcade. And it's worth admitting now that the former writer hasn't had so much fun with his friends in a long time. But he had to return to the task that had already been completed and was given an award. And the prize was quite interesting because he was given information about Everton. Even though he was incredibly tired, he couldn't wait until tomorrow, so he immediately decided to see the award and read the information. And he was given something about a raid on the Academy's dungeon, and there were only 15 days left. If all of this is true, it means that these people are going to attack the Academy and its students during the raid. Of course, the young man was most worried about Yuna and Diamond, because his friends could be in danger if the cult was not stopped in time. The first thing to do now is to inform the professors of the Academy, where the young man immediately thought that Everton might find out about it and choose another place to attack. It's worth calming down and just stopping them yourself because the hero considered it his duty to do so, since he created Everton himself. And at any cost, it must be stopped before the Academy is damaged. I didn't want his close friends who had helped him so much in the past to suffer because of him. For Yoon and Damon, he was truly ready to do absolutely anything and save them, just as they had done. But he would simply not be able to get help and would have to deal with absolutely everything alone, and he would only have 15 days until Everton attacked the Academy. The night passed, the boy rested a little, and in the morning went to see Master Pom Chun. When he entered the hall that had been prepared for him, he was truly surprised. There was so much here that my eyes were dazzled and did not allow me to concentrate on one thing. He simply deafened the master with his screams, but the old man replied that it was a training room for his student and individual lessons. It seemed like a big underworld because the room was incredibly large for a basement of a house, and I can say that it was even better than the rooms in the Academy. But what fascinated him the most was seeing a 5th-generation virtual combat system in this large room. Of course, he wanted to ask where it came from and how everything was built so quickly, but even speaking was becoming difficult for him. In Korea, there was only one such room, and it was rarely used because it cost an incredible amount of money. And it is true that this room was expensive. It cost some 50 billion won, so Pom Chun decided to build it here for his student. He said that Han Jong might think of him as a businessman who wants to invest his money in something bigger, and then the mentor approached the young man, asking if he had already made up his mind. He reiterated that he shouldn't worry so much about the money he had to spend on this training room, and that he should just do his best as he always does. While the writer was still standing there, recovering, the mother walked past him and stopped next to the table where another interesting object was lying. 808. And this thing was exactly what the boy had asked for at the last meeting, so Pom Chun threw it into the boy's hands. He barely caught the thing and then took off the wrapper and looked inside, after which his surprise was beyond measure. Yes, it was the Bastion, and this product was the first of its kind. The effect was the same. That is, this pendant held and concentrated mana and independently chose its owner. In fact, the young man was incredibly happy to see it because it was exactly what he needed right now, and he took the pendant out of the box and began to examine it while thanking the master. At first, all the blacksmiths tried to find out and asked Pom Chun where he got the mineral from, and it's not even worth asking what they were willing to offer to buy it from the man. The disciple just laughed and said that it was impossible to sell such a thing because it was too valuable, especially since the Bastion had already chosen him as its master. But now, Pom Chun came up to the young man and said that they had to start the first lesson, and that it would be better to warm up in the training room first and then move on to something difficult. The master taught all the basics of the academic discipline, and Han Chong was already curious about what he could teach him during the class. Maybe it will be a real sword fight, or perfect use of mana, or hand-to-hand combat and spear use or magic. Eventually, the guy found himself where the first test was to begin, and he heard the system signal that the gate behind him was closed. And the air circulation throughout the room was suspended, and at that moment the young man was even a little scared. For some reason, the floor beneath him also began to glow, and Han Chong did not understand what was happening in this room. Then the mentor told me that he had been thinking for a long time about what he could teach the boy, because he had already learned all the possible theory while studying at the academy. However, if he wanted to become a real adventurer, he needed to gain experience, not read books in the library. Then the system issued another notification that the training room would be contaminated, and while Zhang Min stood in the middle of this chaos, he did not understand what to do. When he looked back, he could hardly see anything because of the darkness, and meanwhile the sticky energy was trying to penetrate him and destroy his mana. It happened in just a few seconds, and this energy enveloped his legs, preventing him from even moving away or running away. Very soon, the guy just couldn't move his body, and it felt like he was in a swamp and was just drowning in it. At the same time, Jongmin heard a voice asking him how he felt inside the dungeon. Despite the fact that it is a simple virtual reality, it is really hard to stand there, and the student will have to get used to the pollution first, and only then go to the cave. It wasn't an easy test, and no one would have offered it to a beginner, but Professor Pom Chun wanted to see everything Zhang Min was hiding from him, and he knew that this kid was up to the challenge. It was all just an illusion and nothing more, but it looked too realistic, so when the boy couldn't breathe, he was incredibly scared. He told himself that he had to get himself together and move forward, and first he had to somehow regain his breath and get back on his feet. At least he did start breathing, but it was very difficult for Jungmin to keep him steady and calm. Chun said that the student stabilized faster than he thought when they first started, and he already knew that the dungeon had a completely different ecosystem. It is also worth knowing that this is the most comfortable environment for all possible monsters. The air in the dungeons is arranged and works in a completely different way from what we are used to. So often a person could simply suffocate in a cave. In this case, the human body will melt and only despair will remain, and this energy will get stuck in the underground corridors. And such caves can damage internal organs or even destroy them. So Jungmin simply cannot hide his unique abilities in such a place. If he wants to survive, he must fight with everything he has. At this rate, 55 minutes had already passed, and all this time the boy was drowning in pollution, and the student's motor skills were severely limited due to the negative energy around him. The towers had automatic cleaning, so he had never encountered such a force before, and Jungmin realized that he could not fail to withstand such pressure just because of his perseverance. Of course, the hero's mana protected his organs from this energy, and then the young man realized that he would have had much more problems if he had not possessed the hero's mana that Eden had given him. The hero's mana grew on its own during the long process of self-cleansing, but his body was already very exhausted, and Jungmin realized that he was going to fall down here. Then the young man finally turned to the teacher, and he saw that he was struggling, which is not surprising, because 57 seconds is quite a long time for a first time. Chun allowed him to come out, but he was unable to find out the guy's secrets, but staying inside without using his powers is an incredible result. But then he heard Jungmin's voice. He meant that he wanted to use his unique skill in the dungeon because otherwise, he would not survive here longer. Chun's attention returned to his student and he could not believe his ears. The mentor thought the guy had gone crazy, but Jungmin looked around the room with a smile and realized that it was really better not to use this technique. But Chun was more interested in why the student hadn't used it for more than an hour, and then ordered him to use the ability immediately, after which the boy felt better. I should have emphasized using the skill from the beginning and not had to suffer so much, but now Jungmin's face was blissful. The master called him a crazy boy for daring to make such a joke in a dungeon that could swallow him up, and even started swearing at him. By now, Jungmin was feeling good and sitting quietly in the middle of the cave with his aura, but soon he heard Eden laughing and asked him what was wrong. But the owner of the tower just said that he was a good man and Jungmin was doing great, but then added that without him, they wouldn't have been able to hold out for 3 minutes. And the hero's mana has become even stronger and more enduring. Eden was right because not only divine energy can resist the devil, but also the higher pure energy possessed by the 7 heroes. This was the hero's mana that Han Zhong had, and now it was very easy for him to sit in the dungeon. He didn't even feel the negative energy. It took a long time for the young man to sit in this cave, concentrating a large amount of mana. The master continued to watch his student, and each of his actions was truly surprising. So Chun wondered how often this guy used his unique skill. Jungmin realized that he could get rid of negative energy through purification, and then he thought about who he would use this time in the immersion. For some time, he was still thinking about this issue, but then he decided who he wanted to choose this time. Jungmin used his immersion training on the younger priest Niter, to whom he had already asked for help. And after applying it, the hero's mana temporarily turned into divine energy, and the priest of Nethers protected him, after which the defense was activated. Back then, low-level immersion did not take so much effort from the guy, and he could use it without significant losses. The sacred energy quickly restored and healed his body, and thanks to this, the oxidation of all internal organs almost immediately went away. It was supposed to be admiring the spirits, which is a unique ability to take over the power of spirits, but it is difficult to master such abilities. And so Chun began to worry that the young man would faint. But after a little more time passed, Jungmin turned to his teacher and said that he was ready, and to his great surprise, the student did not faint in the cave. The master was really surprised to see that the boy was in perfect order and really ready to start the next stage. His strength just never ceased to amaze. Chun asked if it was his friend's teacher, but Jungmin didn't understand what he was talking about, but then the teacher told him to just continue and not pay attention to him. The master had never before encountered such a strong energy that could absorb his fatigue and heal his organs, and for a beginner, Jungmin was doing great. The disciple obeyed and continued to pass the test, but for some reason Chun was already sure that the strength of this little man exceeded even the single highest rank. A few hours passed and then Jungmin collapsed to the ground and all the energy left his body, which was trembling incredibly strongly after exhaustion. The boy managed to stay in the virtual world for a total of 3 hours and 28 minutes, and this student was a godsend for Professor Chun. But he couldn't even call him an ordinary person because the guy reminded him more of some kind of monster with such remarkable skills. Jungmin looked up at him slightly, not sure whether it was praise or insult because he couldn't think straight. Pomchun smiled and said that of course it was praise, or rather admiration for his own skills. Then the master said that it was enough to pretend that it was difficult for him and that he should stand up, because he was not going to applaud standing for the fact that the young man had at least survived. But how could you say that when Jongmin could literally fall off his feet and actually have trouble saying a word? But Pomchun was sure that he was fine, and they could move on. So without any interruption, he decided to start sword lessons right then and there. The boy was not expecting this because he thought he would crawl home and lie on the bed to rest, but then he was told that the training had just begun. But Pomchun will have to stay late for work because of him, and the student also needs to train just as hard if there is such a delay, so the professor decided to start with a simple beating. But Pomchun himself told him to hold on to his strength, so it was his own fault for staying late at work, and now he decided to beat him up for it. But he raised his tone and said that the teacher had very good reasons for this. It took a while, but the training paid off, as the young man got fitter and his health improved, and in that training room he managed to gather information about the dungeon where the adventurers from the academy would go. The trip will be exactly in a week, and everything will take place in an empty meadow next to the Tower of Light, and fortunately this cave was at a low level. They say that there will even be security for the students, and what could happen if there are also teachers. Then the young man thought that the Everton Academy was going too far. To be honest, last week Jongmin was preparing hard for their attack, and thanks to training with the professor, not only his physical condition improved, but his mana flow also accelerated, and now there are no negative effects due to low-level immersion. I may even be able to try the intermediate level immersion in addition to this, and my knowledge of alchemy has increased a bit after the contest. That's why the young man decided to create some medium-level potions and then put them up for sale, for which he received a lot of money. The potion was highly prized in their time, so it sold out very quickly, and the Korean was able to make good money on it, and this amount should be enough. It took some time, and finally the young man arrived at the right place, namely the building where the artifacts were kept, and upon entering, his speech disappeared immediately. Jongmin had a sword of an extremely rare rank in front of him, and it cost 3 billion won, so he decided to look at other options. Eventually, he managed to buy very high-quality equipment with the money he received for selling the potion, and after training, his sword skills improved and he fully mastered the sword. Jongmin also took an extra-dimensional bracelet, an accessory that bends space and can support a weight of up to 200 kilograms. Although the young man could not use it immediately, the main thing was that he was improving his abilities, but it was funny for Eden to watch him admire himself in the mirror. Being a hero is so lonely and hard, and after hearing these words, Eden felt some shame for him and wanted to take all his powers back. While Jongmin was talking so enthusiastically about himself and his new life, his phone rang, and looking at the screen, the young man saw what was bothering his teacher. Jongmin picked up the phone excitedly, and after greeting him, the professor immediately started talking about going to the dungeon. It turned out that the association had asked him for a favor because they said that the safety of the students was a top priority, and so Pomchun decided to go there as the chief manager. But there are high-ranking staff and professors there, so why did they decide to invite Pomchun as well? And why so many guards for just an ordinary dungeon? Then the young man told the teacher that he wanted to go there himself because it meant that it would be very safe. But the professor does not understand why he should go there either, and then Jongmin began to invent at least something to justify himself. He said that he had left the academy trusting Pomchun, so he could not dream of a dungeon until he received a license to attack, so he wanted to at least look at the cave. At first, the teachers was angry because Jongmin was allegedly accusing him of not being able to get into the dungeon, but the boy immediately said that it was not that simple. His student had to visit the dungeon at least once. Of course, the experience was very important. Now, this guy is able to clear a low-level dungeon on his own without any help. Thinking about all these details, the professor agreed to take him with him, but told him not to leave his side. The guy was incredibly happy when he heard a positive answer, because it was also his dream to go to the dungeon, but his teacher said that going to the cave would be another additional training. The young man agreed to this training, and for the next week he trained hard and fulfilled all the tasks of his master, and soon the last night before going to the dungeon came. Jongmin went into a chat room with his friends and told them that tomorrow they would see each other at the academy, and they were surprised because they had never heard that their friend would be there. Meanwhile, the Everton sect was also preparing for the attack. It was a very important day in their activities, so the preparations were very thorough, but they were sure that a trap would be set. Meanwhile, the response disappeared somewhere, and the connection deteriorated significantly at that moment. At the same time, they turned to number 10 and asked if everything was ready and if they could finally go to the dungeon raid. Their leader has prepared the seed again, and when the students, along with the professors and guards, let their guard down and relax, he will plant it again. But this time he would have to pay the price of his own life for a failed mission, and the head asked him if he was ready for it, and number 10 said he would do everything right. After a short speech and all the instructions, he was released first, and as he left their cave, they kept their eyes on him. Success in the face of defeat, and destruction in the face of the impossible. Then they got together and began to perform the ritual, repeating the words chapter by chapter. The curse was in the face of the darkness. After these words, they had almost completed their ritual and only one last thing remained to be done. Then their boss ordered them to finally plant the seeds, and the wards got to work after his order. He himself stood behind them and said that all their actions would continue to glorify Everton and they would never stop. Eventually, the night ended and the boy got out of bed in a great mood because he had been waiting for the day when he would finally get to the dungeon. He got ready very quickly and went to the academy, but when he entered the territory, he saw no one there and realized that he had probably come here too early and no one had gathered yet. Or he was late and everyone had already left, but very unexpectedly for him, someone came up behind him and touched his shoulder, and the young man looked back. It was Saren, who was also in a good mood, and then asked her friend what brought him here and who he was waiting for. However, the young man was in no hurry to answer and only smiled at her and then asked her what about her and whether she had come here for a tour of the academy's dungeon. The girl happily replied that she would indeed go on the tour because she had been chosen after receiving her scholarship and was also very grateful to him because he was her former teacher. The young man laughed and realized that in addition to Yuna and Taemin, who also had to go to the dungeon, something bad could happen to Saren if the cult did attack the cave. After a few minutes, he saw his two friends who called out to him and then greeted Catherine, who was standing next to him, even though they had not expected to see him here so early. Although Yuna and Tae-Ming did not believe that their friend would go to the dungeon until the last moment, they started talking about his sabbatical and how he wanted to leave the academy. Then Tae-Min told Saren that their friend had dropped out of the academy because he had a personal teacher. Of course, she was also very curious to know who Tae-Min's mentor was. But the young man did not have time to answer, because right behind him appeared the father of all the adventurers, and Saren could not believe her eyes when she saw him. Choi Pom-chun calmly walked past the other people and waved to Jong-min, who was looking at him silently. The whole group, except for Jong-min, was surprised when he told them that he would accompany them in the dungeon, and as expected, he was very cool, but the guy himself silently watched their reactions because he hadn't told them about it yet. In fact, the guy was happy to have such a cool teacher, but he didn't want to be the center of attention, and if everyone knew about it, it would be unavoidable. Jong-min was even thinking about just running home and not listening to all this. While Jong-min was still struggling with his thoughts, Pom-chun approached his student and greeted him, and when he didn't return the greeting, the old man said that it was worth greeting when your master was around. And you don't have to pretend that he doesn't know it and just doesn't pay attention. Since everything was already lost, Jong-min just sighed and smiled, then greeted his friends and introduced them to his professor. At the time, Pom-chun felt proud and happy, and Jong-min's friends were surprised and asked him questions because it was too cool. Saren could not contain her excitement because it was the first time she had seen the so-called father of all adventurers, and it turned out that he was her friend's teacher. Of course, what happened was what the young man feared, because he was the center of attention and his friends were going to find out everything from him, and Tae-Ming asked how and where he and the master had met. But Yuna didn't understand why the boyfriend kept it a secret. If it was such great news, he could have shared it with them first and not been silent. The guy could not stand all this shouting and their thoughts, so he closed his ears for a moment and shouted loudly to stop them, and then asked them to ask one question at a time. It didn't take long to get to the dungeon, and all the while Jong-min was worried because his friends kept asking about Choi Pom-chun. But when they got to the dungeon, the screams stopped because the infected magic had begun to work. The boy stayed close to his friends, and the professor and teacher walked ahead, leading the students. But for some reason, they were restless. In fact, the dungeon was different from Yuna's stories. She didn't talk about the forest, but there was a possibility that the company simply went down the wrong road. But the girl herself admitted that she had a strange feeling and advised her to tell the professors because they said that the underground passages were at the lowest level. But now, the students saw not a weak dungeon, but rather a high-ranking one or close to it, and it became clear that something had changed. In fact, they were all a little scared and wanted to get home as soon as possible, but the team of friends decided to stick together. Saren went up to Jong-min, and they started talking about something so that it wouldn't be so scary, but it turned out that his friend couldn't even watch a horror movie because she was scared. But Yukil, who also joined the group, was fiercely angry and still felt jealous of Jong-min because he hoped to the last that he would not become a student of Master Choi Pom-chun. What was this weakling doing here if he was never good at anything, and his former classmate just hated him with all his heart? Then the system started searching for the Night of Screams in the novel, but the author of the story did not remember writing such a chapter, but it was interesting to find out what it was about. They continued to move forward, and then everyone saw something truly terrifying in front of them. They began to be terrified by zombies who spoke in a slightly hoarse and lifeless voice, and when they saw people, they immediately went straight for them. The professor got scared and exclaimed that this had never happened here before when they did the preliminary inspection, and Pom Chun ordered everyone to calm down and stay together. The team stepped back to protect their students, but the monsters continued to attack them, and although they were moving slowly, it was very frightening, especially for the younger one. Jongmin froze in place, looking at the spirits. He was really scared, but there was something fascinating about those eerie faces. He couldn't stop looking at them and held his breath as he gazed into those soulless eyes, and suddenly, the writer remembered everything. While the professors were trying to provide for the students, Jongmin ran to the teachers to tell them everything. If he remembered this chapter correctly, there is a way to defeat this pack of monsters that are coming. The guy realized that he had no time to wait any longer, so he turned to the professor who was about to fight evil spirits. But his disciples stood up to defend these creatures and covered them with urkas, telling them not to attack them for anything. It's not even worth mentioning how surprised Pom Chun was when this guy said such nonsense. What do you mean by not attacking if they are in a dungeon and there are evil spirits in front of them who want to eat their souls as well? And then the writer looked back at them again and then said with a smile that he himself understood that they gave him goosebumps, but that it was really not worth destroying them. They won't touch them, because if they really wanted to attack the company, they would have done it long ago, but the monsters were just happy to see people in their home. Of course, Pom Chun used the adventurer's eyes to find the truth in the student's words, because he still didn't understand how the boy had such confidence. The Night of Screams is a cemetery of souls who have suffered all their lives because of the devil's imitators. They are filled with despair and resentment, so they are waiting for living people. And if they attack them, all the dead in this forest will turn into evil spirits and haunt them until death. He knew this very well because he himself wrote this chapter about evil spirits. And he read about how to defeat such creatures, and they have not yet turned into evil spirits, and as long as no one attacks these creatures, everything will be fine. Otherwise, trouble will come. In fact, Pom Chun believed his student, even though other professors and students would not have trusted his words and would have done things their own way. But Master Pom Chun had reason to believe Jongmin, because with the help of the adventurer's eyes, he was able to find the truth in his words. Therefore, the professor said not to attack these spirits and decided to do something different, namely to just stand ready, and if the evil spirits attacked, they would fight back. People really didn't know how to teach better, but since the professor told them to back off, they couldn't obey. Yahello protested the most because it seemed as if no one cared about the lives of the students, and he began to say that the professors wanted the students to become spirits as well. After he said that, everyone fell silent and Pom Chun looked at the student. The master was not going to tolerate such an attitude, so he closed his mouth and said that he would listen to all the compliments later. Of course, Yahello kept quiet because he couldn't go against the father of all adventurers, no matter how much he wanted to. But fortunately for him, the head of the swordplay department came forward and said that Yahello was right, because the priority here should be the safety of the students, not testing what some weirdo was saying. And the head expected understanding and professionalism from Pom Chun's disciple, but in fact, he was simply afraid. But Jongmin said this not out of fear. It's hard for him to explain, but if he can get rid of the resentment of these spirits, he will be able to clear the dungeon without harming anyone at all. He meant that these spirits should be sent to paradise. The head of the department once again said that this kid is really very funny and cheerful, and that he really wants people to believe him. But Pom Chun came up to him and told everyone to calm down, because they didn't come here just to destroy the dungeon. As he knew, there were evil spirits that could not be attacked, and it was better to find ways to clear the dungeon, so he asked the head of the department to act soberly. Jongmin was at least glad that he managed to detain the others and convince them not to attack the creatures now. The head sighed and said that he had made his conclusions after listening to the professor and understood everything. But this guy's body already felt what was about to happen. Unexpectedly for everyone, he quickly ran deep into the cave and left the rest of the team behind. The head of the department very quickly found himself next to these spirits and was about to attack them, and then Jongmin broke free of the chain and shouted again that he shouldn't touch them. But it was too late, because the head of the department had already dismantled several of them and calmly walked on, a sinister smile on his face. At this point, the young man already realized that everything was bad, because now, these spirits would never leave the people who had done them harm and would haunt them for the rest of their lives. He finished very quickly and didn't even need to worry, and afterwards this guy laughed and turned to the whole team as if proud of himself. They didn't want him to do such a simple thing, but were they really ready to take responsibility if the students were hurt and what they would have to say? Zhang Min felt guilty and terrible because he knew that he had to stop those who would harm these spirits at any cost. But this guy suddenly rushed at those creatures, but Pom Chun didn't want to let it go, so he went back to the head of the department. He is not responsible for this whole dungeon, and this conversation really hit him hard. But inside the dungeon, you have to suspect everyone and treat them as enemies, and Yukil remembered that it was Pom Chun who wrote these words. But he also knew how a leader treats his entire team if the Chajiks ignore orders and decide to act on their own. There's just been an unexpected twist, and that's why the difficulty level is about to change again. But Zhang Min realized that they had no time to talk because the worst was about to happen, and the system notified him that the level had gone from low to medium. Who came out of the fog to them? And it was another monster who was very angry because a person had allowed himself to destroy his friend and did not know why Professor Pom Chun wanted to avoid a fight, and they decided that he simply did not know which side to attack from, and no one believed Zhang Min's words until now. The students continued to stand back and look fearfully at the evil spirits coming closer and closer to them. There was another disappointing fact because everyone noticed that the fog had become even thicker, and Professor Pom Chun first decided to ask Zhang Min's opinion and asked if they should intervene. But no matter how much the guy wanted to admit it, it was too late for that because the head of the department had done something irreversible. Due to the wrong approach, the head turned the Night of Screams into the Night of Nightmares, and there were even more souls screaming and not understanding what they had done and why they were still being abused. All their resentment and despair turned into a strong desire to destroy, because they were ready to kill their enemies for a friend, and now all the souls have turned into evil spirits. At this point, they all became very scared and had nowhere to go because now the way Zhang Min had proposed no longer worked. All of them have become evil spirits, and now it will not be easy to stop it and we will have to fight them. They became blinded by the desire to destroy and attacked from all sides from the fog, surrounding the students and their professors, not allowing them to escape. Yukil didn't look so brave when he saw them next to him, and he became so scared that he fell to the ground trying to get away from the monsters. He almost started to cry when he saw it and became very scared because he did not know what it was in front of him. And he was even more afraid of what was happening to the head of the department, who was now sitting on the ground shaking and screaming loudly. The guy could hardly say anything because he started to choke and sweat was streaming down his face. No matter how hard he tried to get air into his lungs, he failed. Pom Chun turned to the student again and asked if he should be taken away from here, because if he really suffocated and died, they would be in big trouble themselves. Saren immediately approached him and said that she would take care of it, and she was very pleased to receive a mission from an adventurer of this level. And then, the professor asked his student if he could join the fight now, because all these spirits had turned evil and were attacking themselves, so it would be impossible to just stand there anymore. However, the young man still objected and said that it would not work and then asked to be given the opportunity and time to settle everything himself. Zhang Min knew this dungeon very well and understood what would happen if attacked, and only he now knew an option that would help complete this mission without much harm to the students. But then Master Pom Chun could not stand it because he was not going to just stand by while the enemies attacked, and he had to do something. But the guy explained his point of view and told him everything. Namely the fact that if they attacked by themselves, these creatures would turn into stronger opponents, and then nothing could be done. Meanwhile, Saren threw her arm around the head's shoulder and dragged him away, and Jung Min admitted that he had a plan and just wanted to save his friends with his own skills. They used to be the only ones who helped him, and thanks to their support he felt at least a little happy while others at best turned away or even mocked him. All Jung Min asked was to believe him and let him fulfill his mission, and then the boy promised that he would save his friends and students and teachers as well. The professor had his doubts for a while because it really sounded very strange to him, but he was already inclined to believe the student because he had never told a lie. At the same time, the old man handed him a rare illusion ring that could change the user's account at the time of mana use, and Pom Chun added that he would intervene if Young Min failed. The young man looked at the ring, and the only question he had was why he needed it. Then the professor said that he knew all about his student's strengths, that he knew he was strong, but for some reason he pretended to be weak or something, and that was why he should stick to his role-playing. The young man laughed and felt a little embarrassed to hear such words, but it was good advice in his case. Of course, he said he would deal with it, but since they have become evil spirits, it is highly likely that Zhang Min will not be able to do it because although he is strong, he is not that strong. But despite all these thoughts, the young man knew that it was up to him to cope with this and stop the madness because he wanted to protect his friends who had been protecting him from others for so long. In addition, it was he who made these people like this in his novel and, as the creator of the story, is responsible for what happens there. And those children who wandered here were abandoned by their parents and then used as human shields during difficult battles. In the end, most did not survive because there was a lot of danger. Or there were children who lost their parents and simply went to that world quietly alone. They have already suffered so much during their lives and now continue to suffer after becoming spirits. And so, according to Jong-min, it would be very wrong to end it all in an evil way by destroying them, because he himself knew what these children really needed. They simply need the peace of mind that they never had during their lives, and after they are gone. In the end, the guy put on the ring his mentor gave him and went forward with the only thought that he had to become the person who would stop everything. Then the young man used the immersion skill on the heretic Michelle Condor, a girl who had been under the care of monks from a small temple all her childhood. And throughout her life as a priestess outside her temple, she saved an incredible number of souls who were full of resentment and despair. And after that, the priestess received a revelation from the source of light and was empowered to save even more souls. He had previously managed to immerse himself in a low-level priest, but Michelle Condor is a very high level, so the guy was not sure that he would be able to do what he planned. That's when the light source found him, and that's when it wanted to know more about him. The young man was very surprised when he heard about the light source, because he did not expect to see Prina like this. At the same time, he received a notification that the light source was protecting him and gave him additional strength and protection. Eden, of course, was watching everything that was happening, and he was also shocked to see Prina and didn't know why she appeared here and now. The idiot he was following all the time had not only recruited the father of all the adventurers, but also Prina. But now Eden had less doubt about the guy's personality. At that time, Adan did not understand what he was really dealing with and who Jongmin was, and the writer now hoped only that he would succeed in his plan. Later he learned that the light source made the dive easier and went smoothly, but that was only the beginning. The guy continued to use his skill, and the connection with Prina has not been broken. And it turned out that he had successfully immersed himself in a mid-level character for the first time since he had used his skill. He had to wait a few more seconds for the help he received from Pom Chunyo to start replacing his appearance and create the image of Michelle Condor. This girl was incredibly strong and her power was very powerful, so the young man hoped that this power would save his friends. A few more seconds and the true author of the story was fully synchronized with the character of his novel and the purpose of the immersion. Professor Pom Chun watched with the same enthusiasm, and this magic fascinated him even more. The master noticed the coincidences and realized that it was the same skill the boy had used in their first lesson. But if then his power was quite decent, now it was even more impressive, and it was difficult to realize the power he possessed. However, he could not answer the question of how this guy became so strong in just 2 weeks of training, because it is simply impossible. Pom Chun smiled once more and was once again convinced that his student was a real monster, and his pride was once again overwhelming. After that, the evil spirits quickly retreated because a very strange rain began to fall on them, and the students even began to calm down a little. Now, they really didn't see the same cowardly student, but the priestess Michelle Condor stood before them. Yuna had already freed herself from the spirits that had held her before, and now all her attention was focused only on this being who had saved her. And Saren, who was also sitting on the floor, also looked at the light source that was above her head. And Taeming stared at the priestess in awe and found himself thinking that she was very beautiful and did not take his eyes off her. Later, the night of screams began to dissipate thanks to her, and this darkness turned into light. Even though these children became evil spirits because of the wrong approach, now everything has begun to change again, and we can say that Han Zhong has succeeded. In the novel itself, it ended with grief for the children who were destroyed by life and did not do what they wanted. How the author of the novel, Jong-min, was going to save all these children and change his own story that he had written some time ago. No one could answer what kind of light it was or who called it here, but the students watched in silence. All these evil souls who had just attacked them began to cry and backed away from the people. Their tears did not stop and fell on the dry ground. At the same time, they began to talk about how the light would save them and help them. In the end, the night of screams was over. He successfully completed the task. The dive came to an end, and the system reported that he had used much more force than his body could withstand. Nevertheless, he was able to successfully use the skill on a strong entity, which increased his positive characteristics, and the light source added that she would continue to take care of him. When it was over, Jong-min fell to the ground exhausted and fainted, and Pom Chun picked him up to check if he was alive, while other students began to worry about his health. As expected, using so much mana in a short period of time was very draining, but the professor had never seen such a power with a side effect. However, now it seemed that everything was only getting worse, as was his condition, and his friends began to worry even more. Since it was over and the guy felt sick, he had to be taken to the nearest hospital immediately, and then the professor told him to request a recovery potion from the association. All 3 of his friends stayed close to the professor and Jong-min, who was still unconscious. It seemed like it was the end and the story was over, but being in the dungeon, they were still under the threat of those who were there. The mentor felt something wrong and looked back, seeing danger behind him. In addition to taking care of Han Jong, who is now unconscious, he had to protect the remaining students and himself. Everton finally came here and timed it very well, because there were few people here, and they are not in the best condition to fight. The head said that if they wanted to live, they had to bring back the 8th hero, then they would leave them alone and allow them to leave the dungeon unharmed. The professor left Han Jong with the other 3 students and went to deal with the danger, because the boy needed to be sent to the hospital as soon as possible while his heart was still beating. But the head of the cult said that he would not allow anyone to leave the dungeon until he got what he wanted. However, Pom Chun was not going to play by their rules and came forward to use his skills against Everton's players. He rushed into the attack himself, trying to deal as big and strong a blow as possible to his enemies. The one in front who had been speaking was now lying on the ground, and for some reason the others did not move without the order of their leader. The professor didn't have time for each of them, so he told them to attack all at once, and it would be even more fun. Very soon the whole horror was over, and they went to the hospital together and hospitalized Jongmin. They had to wait for some time for the young man to open his eyes, but after tens of hours he finally came to. The professor was with him almost all the time and did not leave his side. When he woke up, he was also there and then asked him in a happy voice how he felt after a 3-day sleep. It was obvious that the condition was still terrible, but the young man stood up and asked what had happened to the dungeon with a trembling body. Pom Chun calmly ate an apple and then said that a very strong girl appeared and defeated everyone, and then Jongmin fell and lost consciousness. Then his mentor praised him, but added that losing consciousness, especially for so many days, scared Pom Chun and his friends. He was worried that everything could come to self-destruction if you use your powerful powers so carelessly, and you need to think before you use your skills. That was the end of the good news, and the professor said he had to tell him the bad news. Of course, Jongmin was most worried about his friends and first thought that something bad had happened to them, but that's the last thing I want to hear. But it was much simpler than that. Pom Chun said that he didn't know if Jongmin's parents knew that he had dropped out of the academy, but they asked a lot, so he told them everything. He jumped out of bed, calling his mentor an old man, but he was even a little offended and then said that he should have warned him about this earlier. Now, they won't let him live in peace. But the professor said it was his own fault. And then I heard the voice of a nurse asking the patient and the guardian to keep the noise down in the hospital. A few days later, the writer was discharged from the hospital and went home, even though he hadn't been to this particular place for a long time. It seems like 2 years have passed since he took his sabbatical. But the boy was still angry with this old man who told his parents everything, and now there would be a fight. They were very happy and even hung the poster in their village when he entered the academy and showed the best results every time, becoming a leader among students. But somehow I became indifferent to all this because I did not tell the professor everything, and there is nothing to take back. The boy was still worried about what his parents would say to him about leaving the academy, but he could not postpone his visit to them for long, so he gathered his strength, breathed in the air, and opened the door to the house. Jongmin was even thinking about just falling to the ground and hitting his head on the floor, begging for their forgiveness so that he wouldn't have to hear all the quarrels and accusations. But when the door opened and their son entered the house, the 2 parents welcomed him with a smile on their faces. It turned out that they didn't even think about arguing with him about what happened at the academy. Instead, they just didn't feed him, and the boy remembered that his mother's food was still the best and most delicious. She was worried whether her son was already full and offered him dessert while they were discussing everything. But Jongmin admitted that he would start to vomit if he ate even a piece of anything else, and over the years while studying and taking a sabbatical, he managed to lose quite a bit of weight. When the boy had forgotten about his biggest success, his father started the same unpleasant conversation because his son had not just taken a leave of absence but had simply dropped out of school. He was annoyed that Jongmin had worked so hard to get into the Dream Academy, but knowing the latest news about the dungeon, he was not so angry because getting there was much better than studying. But his mother advised him to find a more stable and safe job. She had heard that a few months ago a new dungeon appeared nearby and was worried about it, and his father said that there was a lot of danger in the world, so he told him to stay home. The young man ignored all these words and focused only on the dungeon his mother had just mentioned. It was around this time that his whole story with his unique skill began, and perhaps it was the very day when the novel was plagiarized and the story written on paper became a reality. Jongmin asked them in more detail about the dungeon and asked them to tell him where it appeared, and then decided to visit the place. Once there, the guy decided to use his unique skill to find the cave itself. He had an academy skill that allowed him to detect objects at the maximum search radius was doubled. But later on, I even regretted it, because the information started coming in such quantities that I didn't have time to memorize anything. But there was nothing to be surprised about because the search radius is 1 kilometer, and Eden helped him and gave him enhanced mana energy. Jongmin just didn't expect it to be that strong, but Eden still thought the guy should be able to look up the whole mountain. The detection ended, and then Jongmin went to the place where the energy led him. It seems that it was here. And indeed, the guy saw an open dungeon in front of him. The system showed that the level of this cave was low and asked if the user was going to enter it. It was strange to hear that it was at a low level, because this dungeon looked too creepy to be of a low rank. Meanwhile, the professor was a member of the Association of Adventurers and went about his business. The specialist opened the cabin and took out the body of one of the adventurers, calling the professor to him. Yesterday, he also examined the body for a very long time, so the doctor asked if he was looking for something specific and if he could help in any way. The master was just trying to figure out what connected all those who had passed away, but apart from a single sign, there was nothing else that connected these bodies, and it was difficult to even guess where they came from. The professor only recalled the words of the Everton head that he had said the 8th hero and that they needed him alive. But the master had no idea what 8th hero they were talking about, and there were no more hands because he didn't say a word afterward. Eden then asked why Jongmin hadn't entered the dungeon for so long, especially since it was at a low level and nothing terrible would happen there. But the young man was thinking about warning the association about the dungeon, but in the meantime, something worse could happen and the monsters could be released. He had to decide whether he would enter the dungeon. On the one hand, it was not difficult, but he was worried that the difficulty would increase like the last time if he entered alone. Then a golden window appeared in front of him and said that she was very disappointed. It was a source of light, but she asked to be called Prina instead of that horrible nickname, and when Eden asked her not to interrupt him when he was talking, the priestess added that he was just as rude as ever. Jongmin understood why he could talk to Eden, but he didn't know that he could communicate with the other characters. So he started looking for a connection and attributed it to the Night of Screams. Vovna then turned to him and said that he was braver, and in the end, he helped the young souls. So she believed that everything would go well in this dungeon as well. After these words, the young man became more inspired and decided to enter the cave, especially since it was close to his house and it would be better to deal with the cave as quickly as possible. The screen appeared again, and this time, though obligatory, the young man pressed yes. A few seconds later, the dungeon called the Path of Choice welcomed him into its corridors and then began to revisit his past memories. In a matter of seconds, tasks began to be generated and the battlefield opened, and the system began to create a dungeon suitable for the user. After a while, the writer was already lying in his bed when the phone rang loudly and woke him up. When Jongmin turned off the sound and put the phone back and laid his head on the pillow, he fell asleep again, but not for long. In a few seconds, he jumped out of bed, not understanding why he was lying there and why he was not in the dungeon. The young man was sure that he had entered the cave, but then everything abruptly ended, and now he was lying under the blanket. Then he turned his gaze to the wall where the results of the month's evaluation were posted, and the tables from the academy were hanging nearby. Now, the guy was sure that he had gone back in time, and the system informed him that the dungeon path of choice was based on his past memories. When the first memory ended, he was transferred to a completely different place, but it was not the dungeon he had entered a few minutes earlier. Now, Jongmin is back at the training grounds of the academy, which he had visited many times during his studies. He stood still while other students walked around him, but now he didn't know what to do at all. It was very difficult to watch what was happening there, because soon I could not see myself falling. He closed his eyes when he heard a loud explosion and saw a flash of light in front of him. He really didn't know what had just happened and didn't understand what was happening around him. Everything around was very dull, and the students looked more like soulless zombies, but the boy's attention was on his past, which had fallen again. In this scene, they showed what happened to him during the same final exam a month later, and it was one of the worst days of his life. In addition to the fact that he was already lying on the ground, he was also hit by a student who was passing by and never missed an opportunity to mock him. He put his foot on Jongmin's face, and he could not even resist because he had no moral or physical strength. Yukil continued to mock him and said that Jongmin was a weakling for giving up so quickly and continued to call him all kinds of unpleasant things. It wasn't fun to mock and torment him because he didn't even say anything, and Jongmin was watching from the balcony. It was so painful and he wanted to forget that day, like many other moments, but he was forced to look at it. But why these memories? Although Yukil thought that the head of the department would start a fight with him, a whole month had already passed and he remained unscathed, so he continued to call him names and beat the weak Jongmin. His friends generally believed that Yukil should have been rewarded because he had beaten the parasite, and why quarrel over such a trifle? However, what reward could there be for killing or beating up vermin? This company continued to mock Jongmin throughout the entire training process. Then he received a notification from the Department of Internal Affairs that he had only 4 days left, and if he exceeded this number, he would be expelled from the academy. Ming believed that he could do it and that he would reach the end and become successful, and at that moment, the dungeon path of choice noticed the user's fear. At the same time, it created an imitation of the person the young man was afraid of at that time in his life, and Min heard a voice behind him calling him a weakling. Looking back, the boy already began to realize what this dungeon was about and what the trials would be like in this place. A few seconds later, Min saw Yukil in front of him, an exact copy of him, and he laughed that it was an honor to go up against the one who had been the best in the written exam. This dungeon restored and created the illusion of a memory from the past in order to fight his fear, and the young man's body was really trembling now. He became stronger, but it was too much. Even though Min realized that it was all just an illusion and that he was not really Yukil, he could not get over himself. To think Yukil would have to fight a weakling in the first round, then he told Min not to take up both of their time and let him beat the crap out of him. This was the test of the dungeon of the path of choice, and the boy would once again have to fight his greatest fear of the time. He was overcome with despair when he heard the same words spoken to him as then, as if he had to relive that horrible day, which he wanted to put out of his mind forever. Yukil called him a disgrace to the entire academy and said that he was incapable of anything, but now Min was at least trying to control his fear and reduce everything to the fact that it was just an illusion. You just need to calm down because it's Han Yukil from the first year, and now the same things won't happen as then, because none of this is real. In addition, the writer knew that he had recently become stronger, and this time he would definitely change the course of events and defeat this idiot. The fight was declared open, and the classmate wasted no time in attacking. So far, Min has been lucky because he hasn't been hit by Yukil and managed to dodge the attack. It looked funny in Yukil's eyes, and he said with the same mockery that this lowlife could improve or this guy was just lucky. Min remembered that he always hit him in the head first, so he managed to defend himself, and this helped him to some extent. Means that this boy had analyzed his opponent's fighting style, but Yukil was not afraid of it because he knew that his classmate could not change anything even if he knew it. In fact, Min said he was glad to see him in person and glad to be able to teach him a lesson now. The test continued, and then Min decided to apply his immersion training again while defending himself. But suddenly, the system notified him that the immersion training tool could not be used. It was simply blocked, and then for a moment Min panicked. This skill was all he had hoped for, but he had no idea what to do without it. Due to the fact that he became distracted and frightened, Yukil managed to throw him away from him, and the writer fell on his back. Yukil laughed again and ironically said that he was playing along because he just wanted to play with his toy. He used a tornado swing and then approached his classmate. He was beating him with all his might and was not going to stop, and in the second move, he used a cobra throw, and this attack was even worse than the first. And in the end, Yukil hit the guy on the head, which is what he was going to do in the first place, and then Min thought it was definitely over and lost. Now he was lying down in front of his opponent, completely powerless and unable to respond to his blows, and he was listening to all his taunts and insults in his direction. At this point, Yukil became more amused because he enjoyed mocking this weakling, who is even afraid to move a finger in front of him and who shakes in his presence. How embarrassing it must have been to lose like that and also to lose consciousness, and his classmates started to kick him because he wanted to have some more fun and understand before the next tournament. Eden continued to watch the boy, but he knew for sure that this was not like Min at all. He could not just lie there and not even answer. He just let some freak beat him up, which is really very different from the Min he knows. In the end, no matter how much he wanted to change things, it was all happening again, and Min was still the same pathetic rag without any unique skill. Will he never be able to become stronger and win? Will nothing ever change and he will continue to shake in front of Yukil? But at that moment he heard Eden's voice and finally he was able to open his eyes. Eden was sitting right in front of him and said that he was very ashamed of Min and did not recognize him at all. He was truly convinced that he would fight and would never give up easily and quickly before someone he wanted to fight back and take revenge on so badly. Where was the guy who escaped his end in the tower? But Eden realized that it was just a trauma that Min had experienced and that it was harder to live through it again. But Eden was quite surprised that this guy could switch so quickly after a few blows, or if it was a simple illusion. But Min told him to shut up because he doesn't know anything and doesn't understand how hard it is for him. But he admitted that Eden was right in what he said. He really hated himself for being able to adapt to what was happening around him, and that's why he created Eden, the hero who never gives up and then wanted to become like him. The boy was still tired and weak, but he found the strength to get up because Eden's words made him do it. Although Min looked tired, he said that it would soon be over. When the young man stood up, Yukil began to laugh at him and said that he was crazy if he wanted to deal with him quickly. And then the classmate said that he had a few more tricks for him and was not going to let this weakling go. When Yukil was about to punch his opponent, Jung-min was the first to do so, and he lost his footing and fell to the ground. The blow was strong and his aura spread across the arena, and now the hero felt confident. He knew he had become stronger than even Yu Keel. He does have more power now, but that was not the problem at all. Eden finally smiled and was glad that he finally got up and started a real fight with his fear from the past. Although Jong-min was still afraid and still worried, he knew he could fight back and was really happy that he was now on the right track. Of course, Yu Keel was angry after what the boy did to him, but he couldn't get up yet. So he held his chin where the boy hit him. He was wounded, but it was not the pain that worried him more. It was the fact that this weakling dared to raise his hand to him and do such a thing. But Yu Keel told Jung-min not to relax because he still wouldn't beat him, only after he decided to play a little, and then promised to make the boy beg for mercy. While Jong-min was standing in the middle of the training ground, his opponent used a disguised running skill, and in a moment he was no longer visible. Only dust cleared behind him. It was unexpected, and Jong-min didn't have time to react, but a classmate quickly came alongside and pushed him as hard as he could in the shoulder. This was even more difficult because Jong-min could not even understand where Yu Keel was, so he could not defend himself against his blows. Only for a moment did the illusion stop, and Yu Keel laughed, only to humiliate his enemy once again and call him a weakling. After saying a few not particularly pleasant words, the guy disappeared from Jong-min's sight again, and he could not figure out where he was. There was simply no way out, and if he continued to try to build a strategy now, everything would go wrong. So Jong-min decided to just trust his gut and use his unique academic skill. When his eyes were closed, he could see more clearly and could figure out where Yu Keel was using the detection skill. Then the effect of the enhanced mana system increased significantly, and the hero finally opened his eyes and turned to the enemy. At the moment of the shot, Jong-min managed to block the opponent's attack, albeit at the last moment. Yu Keel was definitely not expecting this, because he was sure that he was going to beat the weakling, who was unable to reveal his location, but he was more agile. He was really starting to get annoyed by the fact that such a powerful skill might not work on a weakling like him, so he rushed at him again with his weapon. Yu Keel wanted to put an end to this, and now he was not up for fun. He just wanted to finish the fight and humiliate this guy once again. And he was able to do it 2 years ago in the same place in front of other students and teachers, and it was that day that Jong-min remembered as his worst nightmare. All these skills that Yu Keel used that day worked against Jong-min's past, but now things have changed a lot and he has grown a lot. And because of his awakened skill and the confidence that grew with his relentless training, Jong-min became someone who could overcome his past and fight back against Yu Keel. The classmate got even angrier and began to lose control of himself. He couldn't believe that someone like Jong-min could beat him or even stand next to him. But he realized that this guy's energy was too powerful now and there was no way to resist it. He thought he was a weakling and didn't even think about his own loss. But finally, Jong-min was able to do what Idan did in the novels. He stood up for himself and learned to fight back. He learned to fight and won. Yu Keel now finally fell down and his weapon flew out of his hands. He could not move and did not make a sound. Only after a few seconds did the classmate try to raise his head, but nothing happened and he remained lying on the ground defeated. The realization that he had lost to this guy was simply disturbing, because how could such a weak student show himself in such a good light? Yu Keel was truly afraid, just as Jong-min had been afraid of him, and he considered him a motor with too much power and no way to resist it. But the victory was even easier to explain because Jong-min simply stopped feeling fear of his enemy, and Yu Keel will now fear him on a subconscious level. In the end, the young man successfully passed the dungeon's tests and then returned to his parents, who again asked him to visit them more often because they would forget what their son looked like. Now, Jong-min was very happy to be back home and see his parents. I was even more glad that I had finally knocked all the stupidity out of Yu Keel, who had been bothering me for so many years. The right bus pulled up to the stop, and then the young man said goodbye to his family and took his seat, leaving them. Everything was going well, and the boy was satisfied with his work because he was not afraid to go into the dungeon and was able to pass the test. Then he received a notification asking if he wanted to see his reward for completing the path of choice, and when Jong-min opened it, he found himself holding his own book. It was about the Age of Destruction, in which the class was aristocratic but at a low level, and the setting was aimed at providing the author's brain with the necessary information, and this text could only be read by the author himself. But the author's skills were not enough to unlock absolutely all the functions, and this was the most annoying thing right now. But if he manages to reread his books in this way, it's a good option in case he forgets a point. While the young man was quietly reading away from people, Yuna came up to him and unceremoniously looked at the screen, which was completely black. In fact, she scolded Jong-min, who was sitting quietly, and then he asked her what she was doing here, because she should be at the academy right now. But Yuna laughed back and then said that she had also decided to leave the academy. But Jong-min thought that the girl was just crazy to say such things because she was one of the top 2, And how could she leave the academy in such a case? But he also dropped out, so why be angry? Unlike him, Yuna had a lot of opportunities after graduation, and she was good at everything. While they were quarreling with each other, Taeming came up to them and stopped his friends from sharing something again. Jongmin was surprised to see him, but then the gift of speech was finally taken away from him because his friend told him that he had also left the academy. The guy just couldn't understand why they chose to do this, because they were the best students and had so much potential, and they decided to just quit. However, Yuna said that it was very cool, because now they can study together outside the academy and prepare for the adventurer's exam, because Mr. Pomchun allowed them to use the training room. However, if he knew that she called him that, he would be angry, because Pomchun liked to be called master. But that's not what matters now, and Toaming also thought it was a really cool opportunity to improve their own skills with the help of a training room where they could train on their own. He also praised her and said that they were both very smart, but then Jongmin was even a little upset because for some reason the old man hadn't said that to him. But there was no time to be angry about it, so Taemin suggested that the two friends go train together right now. Eventually, Jongmin agreed and asked where the grandfather was. And he was still at the Adventurers Association, trying to solve this Everton mystery that had haunted him and claimed many lives over the weeks. He received a call from one of his wards, who informed him that they had caught another cult member who also drew a magic circle. It was unknown how many of them there were because every day they worked to catch them, because the cult was strong and new ones came every time. And then the ward said that the man had also said something about the coming of the demon. And there were too many of them to consider them a small cult and ignore them. At the same time, Pomchun looked again at the photographs he had taken of the same symbol. And it was the same mark as the guy who attacked them in the dungeon. And it's the only clue that Professor Pomchun has so far. And the bodies that were brought for examination also had these symbols engraved on them. Now, they are all over the city, and the cult's power is growing. These people said something about the 8th hero, about whom the master knew nothing, and also talked about the devil. After the appearance of the new 7 towers, people associated with the devil appeared, and it became interesting whether they were related to the towers. So Pomchun decided to continue his work because he wanted to deal with this immediately. But Jongmin had already gone to the artifact shop for the second time because he had made some potions again and was able to earn quite a bit of money, so he decided to buy something useful. While the young writer was walking around the store with weapons and armor and looking around, someone approached him. It was Zhang Jiwan from the Heavenly Guild, and he wanted to recruit the boy again because he had heard that he had recently awakened, so he handed Jongmin his business card. The young man said hello and felt a little uncomfortable because he thought that Yuna had already told him everything, but he took the business card anyway. She was the daughter of the head of the guild, and Jongmin himself said that he was taking care of him, even though it still felt strange. Zhang Jihuan also heard that Jongmin had applied for an adventurer's license and asked why he didn't decide to join the guild later. However, this time, the sweeter one politely refused and explained that he would feel pressured to join an organization that was connected to his friend and then apologized. The guild member was disappointed then, because he really hoped to lure this guy to join him and build a team of the strongest, but there was nothing he could do about it. And then Jongmin finally said goodbye to Zhang Jiwan, saying that he had a lot of urgent business to attend to, and they parted ways. Adan didn't understand what this man saw in him and why he wanted to hire him so badly, but it was obvious that Jongmin was a genius. And yet, hearing him say that, Eden regretted asking him about it. Zhang Jiwan finally found himself in the elevator, but he felt terrible his unique skill, the Eye of Truth, couldn't get close to this guy. He was simply thrown away and couldn't even scan Jungmin's skills, and it was the first time this had happened to Zhang Jiwan. He had never done anything like this before, and even in the gym it was not that hard, so he became even more interested in it and wondered what Master Pomchun knew about it. All this powerful energy surrounded Jungmin and made it impossible to read the foreign language about him, as if protecting him from prying eyes. Zhang Jiwan could feel this powerful energy as soon as he approached this future adventurer, and it was something incredible. Everything was changing very quickly, so he decided that he needed to get closer to Jongmin as soon as possible before it was too late, and he knew he was ready to do anything to do so. At the same time, the young man took his headphones and began to talk on the phone, although he was actually just pretending. Prina was surprised to find out that he had already used everything, but thought that he had just bought a lot of stuff at once, but this thing would really be useful in the dungeon, so he wanted to prepare in advance. Everything was going well, until the author of the story discovered an object that radiated Everton energy, and then Jungmin stopped. But he couldn't answer what they were going to do this time, and he felt uneasy, so he decided to use the detection skill. At first, he left the premises because he did not want to do it there, and needed to find a larger area to use, so he went to the building and this space should have been enough. Then, the guy used the detection skill and his ability grew depending on the hero's mana and started looking for the object. At first, Jungmin decided to check the store and it was clean. The first and fifth floors were also clean. And at this point, the young man thought he had lost sight of the energy, but soon found an object with a copycat tag in basement number 1. His training was enough to see everything carefully, so Jungmin approached the object. And now, I could finally say that I had found what I needed and decided to act. He saw the same mark that Everton fans were leaving all over the city. Eden didn't understand how the boy even knew what the mark should look like, and Jungmin excused himself by saying that he had seen it in a book, even though it wasn't there. Prina told him to use his power and that she would help him in due time, and he knew that Everton's magic circle had been used to summon the demon and knew of only one way to erase it. Jungmin had the necessary supplies in his bracelet, so he decided that he would do it right away. Jungmin tried to do all this as quickly as possible without using immersion. When he touched the symbol in the basement with his hand, it disappeared almost immediately, and the young man breathed a sigh of relief. But he knew that he shouldn't relax just yet because he wanted to check for other magical circles, so he used the detection skill for the second time. His senses were sharpened, and his aristocratic fantasy began to search for magic that resembled the mark of imitators from the Age of Destruction, and eventually found another object. And then another and another dozen. And at that moment, Jungmin became afraid of how many of them there were all over the city if he found so many in just a 1-kilometer radius. When I found one, I was already excited and thought that this would be the end of it, but I definitely did not expect such a large number. Jungmin stopped using the skill, but he kept thinking about how many more of these copycat marks could be scattered. Everton watched him and saw that this guy was erasing their marks on his own, and one of the cult members offered to stop him. Now, they were sure that this guy was the 8th hero, and he kept interfering and would be a big obstacle in the execution of their plan. And judging by the way he easily took the first seed, he was using divine power. They should have destroyed it as soon as possible before it was too late, but the cult could not even get close to it. The others were ready to deal with the problem if the head ordered them to, but number 1 said it was too risky, and they could not act rashly. Now, there was really no point in such a donation, because each of their people is worth their weight in gold, especially since it is impossible for one person to remove all the magic circles on their own. But right now, their seed is under great threat. Then the Divine Apostle will react with his power with magic circles and protect all these seeds. The guy's back hurt so much after he went around all the places where the marks were left. The magic circles were still scattered around the city, and he hadn't managed to destroy them all yet. But if there are magic circles here, then the seeds of the curse must also be somewhere nearby. But Jungmin couldn't even erase them, so how can he possibly find the seeds? In order to summon this demon, magical circles and seeds of curse are needed. If these seeds are planted in a person and with mana as a vessel, the victim is taught that the demon will be reborn. The problem is that it is very difficult to find it, so the young man decided to ask a master to help him erase all these circles. He wrote to him about all this and arranged to meet him in a cafe nearby where the guy was already sitting, but in the meantime he had to find a person for the seeds. The young man sat waiting, but then he heard the voice of his friend who also entered the cafe. Saren smiled and waved at him, walking straight to the table where the boy was sitting. He was surprised to see the girl, and Saren immediately started asking when he was discharged and how Jungmin was feeling now, but he was more surprised by how she knew where he was. The girl said that she just saw him through the window and then offered to buy him a drink to celebrate, but he refused and immediately said that he was going to leave soon. After that, something very strange happened. Maybe he thought it was just him, but Jungmin heard 2 heartbeats. And after that, an abnormal flow of mana began to direct itself directly at the author of the story, and now the boy was finally sure that it was another curse like the one that had happened to Yuna. At the same time, the young man asked his girlfriend to give him her hand because he needed to check something. Then Saren extended her hand to her former mentor, and he felt the same way again as before. It seemed as if a current had passed between them, and they were both electrocuted, which is why the girl abruptly withdrew her hand and stepped away from him. The guy sat there, not understanding anything, and Serena's arm still hurt a little. It was like static electricity, but this shock was too strong. A few more seconds passed, and then the author of the story discovered the seed of the curse. She responded to the divine energy, but the guy still didn't understand when exactly it happened. Perhaps it happened during the visit to the dungeon, because enough time has passed since then to stabilize these seeds. Then he decided to read the information about the seeds of the curse from the book of the Age of Destruction. There were 3 stages: high, low, and medium, and the demon would be automatically summoned when the stage reached the maximum. This curse potion had not yet attached itself to Saren's mana, and it was still possible to remove it, and it might be easier than he thought. If the demon had already been summoned, the battle would have been quite difficult, but for now he has a chance to stop everything at an early stage and prevent chaos. When he smiled at you because he was happy that it wasn't so bad, you thought he was laughing because she was in pain, and that hurt her a little, But then Jongmin decided to explain the situation to help her. Saren was told that he would listen to him carefully, but he did not know how to tell the person without scaring them too much. In the end, he decided to tell her that she would just have to be patient and everything would get better. And then he would buy her something tasty. However, she was really a little scared because Jongmin never told her anything concrete. In the end, he didn't want to waste too much time, because the seeds could have stabilized and then it wouldn't have come to a fight with the demon. If he does it here and now without wasting any time, it will end at this point. But it all went too far, and one of the Everton players smiled and said that the guy would never make it. Jongmin heard an unfamiliar voice next to him, and then he was very frightened and froze in place. He screamed a lot because the glass broke and everything around him started falling. Then the guy fell to the ground and covered his head with his hands. Other people in the cafe were also injured as glass started falling on them, and they tried to shield their faces from the shards. Eden and Prina had already sounded the alarm, and the girl immediately asked Jongmin if he was okay for the time being. Saren was standing behind him, and the guy was trying to get to his feet, after which he asked who he was, and it all happened very badly. It was one of the members of the Everton cult who tried to stop the guy from erasing their marks, and that's why he came here and found out his location. He immediately attacked Jongmin, swinging his claws at him. For the demon, this was the only way to wipe him off the face of the earth, and then this annoying guy would not interfere with their plan. This time, Jongmin dodged along with the girl, but the cult member was too fast and they literally could not follow him with their eyes because he moved at the speed of light. When they almost came to the end, and Jongmin and Saren were cornered, they were saved by a professor who fortunately came in time to protect his students. Although the master was a strong adventurer, this demon was so much stronger than him that the old man managed to take the brunt of the attack, protecting his students, but he himself flew away from the blow. Jongmin was very afraid for his master and was shocked to see that this demon had dealt with the professor so easily. He was unharmed except for a few scratches and bruises, but Pom Chun now realized how strong an opponent he was facing and with whom he would have to fight. But what worried him the most was that this demon had dared to attack his student, and protecting his students was his priority. Fortunately, the master was here just in time. He had just finished his work earlier and came here now. Pom Chun joined the students, telling them to stand back. He tried to deal with this demon himself, despite the fact that the cult member was much stronger than him, and told the boy to hide far away. Jongmin didn't back down. He didn't want to leave the old man alone, seeing what this cult could do, and the demon suddenly approached him again, mocking the master's words. The demon laughed when he heard these words and stood in front of Professor Pom Chun, showing that he was not afraid of him at all. But it was too rough. Someone from the S class would have fallen to the ground and stopped breathing a long time ago. But the demon was annoyed that this old man was helping Jongmin again and preventing him from destroying him. Pom Chun was really surprised to see the demon unharmed because he had snapped its neck, but it survived. At the same time, the demon introduced himself, calling himself an apostle of Satan, and called him a mole. He bowed and looked into the eyes of his rivals again. Pom Chun had already realized that this guy was involved in the Everton cult, and he was incredibly annoyed by all this. But he was not one of those ordinary priests, for he was an apostle who had received a blessing from their god, for unlike the gods of other people, theirs answered prayers. But time is running out, and it's time to get the party started and get things done. Jongmin stood behind his professor without even moving, and then he discovered another mark of the Everton cult. It turned out that all these tags had been distributed in advance to their respective places. Even more than 1,000 of them were made, and they all detonated simultaneously. The master was very frightened when he heard so many explosions and saw what was happening around him. All those magic circles that the boy was able to destroy did not prevent the plan from being fulfilled, because there were many more marks and the energy they possessed exploded at once. Only now did the young man realize that Amel was simply stalling for time so that the tags could detonate, and then Jongmin thought that it would be advisable to destroy at least a few circles to reduce the energy. He was still behind the professor, but when he looked back, he noticed that his friend had disappeared. The young man had never heard of her running away or anything else, so he was surprised. Only after looking around did the young man notice the girl who was among the demonic energy. Amol approached the 8th hero with a pleased face and then spoke to him, asking if he knew what the demons liked most. They like human fear the most because seeing them tremble in front of you gives them so much strength and energy. The whole city began to change, and soon the poles were visible in every corner. Ordinary people could see them too, and children were afraid. Numerous red poles alerted all the residents of the city. No one knew what they were or where they came from, so the only option was to run away. But they came to their senses too late, because these pillars created a dome that did not let them out. When people went outside, they noticed a hole opening up in the sky, and it was getting worse and worse with each passing minute. Demonic energy began to cling to people who were nearby. All these evil spirits that had gotten close to the townspeople would not leave them. and now there were an incredible number of these spirits, and people simply had nowhere to run from them. These souls kept coming and coming from this big hole in the sky, and there were more and more of them, and there was no longer a single quiet corner of the city. The boy realized that this demon takes the souls of people without mana, and that Saren would also become one of the demons if she absorbed all their souls. So Jungmin decided that he needed to get rid of all the seeds as soon as possible or save his close friend. But the Apostle Amol laughed again. As if reading the boy's thoughts, he would not have been able to destroy the curse until his friend turned into a demon. He came to his senses too late, and the effect of the demonic energy had already begun to consume Saren's body, so it was almost over. Amol said with a sinister smile on his face that there was nothing more the hero could do. Very soon, every soul that is damned will be inside Saren's soul, and after that, nothing will save it. Her body will become the place where the demon will be reborn and come to Earth, and after his arrival, real chaos will begin not only in this city, but throughout the country and the world. However, it was not over yet, because the professor was not going to give up anymore. It seemed that he had completely lost his mind and lost his fear. Pom Chun shouted that Amol had really grown so strong, but then continued to talk about this nonsense. The master said that he hadn't read any strange books, and at that moment Jungmin even felt a little uncomfortable because it was all based on his novels. Amol didn't take his words seriously, only saying that they would kill him faster if he didn't stop in time. The demon rushed at the old man and told him to fight with all his strength if he still had it, and maybe then he would live a few minutes longer. But the professor already knew that he would not need these powers, and even if he fought, he would still be defeated. The demon rushed at him with its claws swinging, but at the last moment the master managed to defend himself. Although he had lost hope of getting out of here, his powerful barrier prevented Amol from touching him. Very unexpectedly, the master was able to throw the demon away from Saren, and then it seemed to him that this was the perfect moment to get close and destroy the cursed seed. But just as he was about to do so, he heard a very familiar smell. The demon stood in front of Eden and the heroes, and the air around them was filled with the smell of decomposing bodies. It's exactly the same as the first time a boy describes the appearance of the demon in his novel. Jungmin really didn't believe that all this was happening in reality and not on the pages of a book. It really ended very quickly, and when Jungmin looked back at the place where Saren was, he saw that the girl had turned into a demon. The girl finally became a demon. She looked incredible, but Jungmin was too late. He was even more depressed by the realization that this happened because of his novel. If he hadn't written his stories, these towers would not have appeared, and what he sees before his eyes would not have happened. Jungmin approached his friend with fear and asked Saren if she would even recognize him, and mentally hoped that she would at least not attack him. However, the girl did not recognize him. She stared at him silently for a while and then asked him emotionlessly who he was. The demon's voice sounded like it came from another world, like metal rubbing against metal, and he wanted to step back, wanted to change something, but now he didn't know how to bring her back. Even this voice was exactly like the boy had described it in his story, and the thought that he was the creator never left him and never gave him rest. Everything around him began to darken sharply, and Jungmin realized that the situation was hopeless because he saw no way to save his friend. He didn't want to believe that he would have to let her go, and he couldn't forgive himself for just leaving her here. But there is no way to stop a man who has turned into a demon. At least he didn't know how, but if he doesn't stop it, it will get worse. It will go to kill people, and it will not stop with a few victims. It will go to a city that will also be small, and as a result, a huge number of people will suffer. Although it seemed that there was no way out, the young man tried to do everything, so he used the unique skill of immersion. He managed to lock the girl in a cage and then began to use divine energy on her. The boy put all his strength into freeing Saren from the demonic energy and again turned to the priestess for help. It was a divine spell that destroyed the demon, and it spread through Saren's body. Jungmin knew how much pain she was in right now, and tears welled up in his eyes that he had to cause this pain. So far, this is the only way to exorcise the demon from the victim he remembered, and there was no time to wait. He couldn't see much because there was a lot of fog all over the area, but what he could see reminded him that his friend was falling to the ground without breathing. However, this did not happen, and the demon could not be exorcised from her, and she became angry that he dared to do this. Already very angry, she rushed at Jungmin to scratch him and destroy him, but she couldn't reach him. The guy was scared because he had no doubt that the divine energy would work and drive out the demon, but it did not work at all. The professor was not there. It was happening in another room, but he heard the artificial explosion clearly. This confused Pom Chun, and the old man began to worry about the children he had lost sight of. But he was distracted from his main enemy because the devil's apostle Amol was still here and would not let him go. How he even dared to turn away from the demon during the fight. Although Pom Chun didn't have that much strength, he still tried to fight because he needed to get to his students first. He was going to kick the demon, but it was still moving very fast, so the professor had to try to hit it. Chun had so many problems created by this cult. But even after the blow, Amal did not give up, and he laughed ominously and said that it was not the end, because Saren had already turned into a demon. She was stronger than Jongmin, so she easily knocked the guy to the ground and he hit his head hard, while Saren stood silently over his body. Now, the young man felt powerless because he had already done everything he could, but it did not help. He was angry with himself for being so weak, because if he had more strength, he could have done something and possibly saved his close friend. He would have helped her and freed her from the spell, but now he felt like a miserable rag because he couldn't even do that. Nothing bad would have happened to her if I had learned more, or if I hadn't written this novel at all. And being stronger, he would not have risked the lives of others, or at least he could have done something to save them as well. Jongmin continued to beat himself up for writing the damn book that started it all, because if it wasn't for the story that turned into reality, nothing would have happened. He closed his eyes, tears streaming out of them, and simply begged Saren to come back because he did not believe until the last moment that she would disappear from his life forever. The young man knelt and begged, hoping in his mind that it would work, and then he heard one single word from her lips. Saren had always called him Busum, and now she said the same. At that moment, he reawakened his hope that all was not lost and that he would be able to bring Saren back to life and free her from the curse. When the girl became a demon, her soul was supposed to be completely destroyed, but for some reason her eyes looked normal again, which meant that she was still alive. The eyes changed again, and the boy heard Saren say that she was scared and asked him to save her. It was so strange that the girl was still conscious. She was in so much pain and Saren could not breathe. She didn't even know what to do or where she was because the last thing she remembered was meeting Jongmin in a cafe. And then they met the demon Amal who attacked them, and chaos ensued when the marks of those who follow the devil detonated, and now she is here. She was attacked by this strange guy with sharp claws and she couldn't remember anything else, but the pain was spreading throughout her body. She thought she heard her own voice somewhere in the distance, but she was sitting in complete darkness and could hardly move. But she was frightened when she heard a request for help. The girl looked back and fell silent, listening to what was being said. When Saren looked there, she was even more terrified because she saw a dozen people begging for help and not understanding how they ended up in the cages. The screams filled the entire space and tore at her soul, making Saren feel uncomfortable with their pleas. As her eyes began to adjust to the darkness, she saw hundreds of cages with people in them, each begging for help and release. The girl gathered all her strength and despite the pain got up on her feet to help these people, but she did not know how to get them out of there. But as soon as she stepped away from her seat, the hand of a demon appeared behind her, unwilling to let go of Saren. She looked around and saw something terrible that scared her even more. These were new victims whom the demon had caught and grabbed with his long fingers and was about to put in cages with the others. She realized that she had to do something because Saren was an adventurer and her vocation was to save people in trouble, so she rushed to help. Forgetting the pain, the girl used a unique skill of the ice world and created a large block of ice. For a moment, the demon's hand let go of all these people and they fell on the ice platform created by Saren. She was surprised when the attack worked, but since it was useful, she decided to keep striking to free the people. Just as the adventurer was about to use her unique skill for the second time, she was hit hard in the back. This blow was incredibly strong and she immediately fell to the ground and hit very hard. The attack was so powerful that even her clothes were torn and wounds appeared all over her body. Only a few seconds later, she was able to get up, feeling immense pain. Her whole body hurt so badly that she let out a few tears, and even more depressing was the fact that she did not know how to proceed, how to get out of here on her own, and how to get those people out of this place. She wanted to save them, but how could she do it if the demon was attacking her and would not give up on her either? She turned away feeling powerless, but suddenly there was a light and she heard the demon screaming. His next attack was rejected, but she didn't understand how because she did absolutely nothing. Only later, listening, she heard the familiar voice of Jongmin begging her to come back, and it seems that this is what saved her from the enemy's attack. He begged her so sincerely to come back and asked her not to leave him that it really helped. Saren could not hold back her tears. It was very cold and dark, scary and uncomfortable, and she told the guy that there were a lot of people imprisoned here and she could not save them alone. Saren herself began to ask him to save her, to save them all from this dark place full of demonic energy. When a person is turned into a demon, his soul is automatically destroyed and cannot be brought back, but here it happened differently. The boy saw behind her numerous souls of people screaming for help, begging to be rescued from there, and the girl's body stood still in the form of a demon. Jongmin really didn't understand why she was still conscious and could even say something to him, but it meant to him that there was a chance for her to be saved. The guy just couldn't calm down hearing all these cries of people's souls, which were getting louder every minute, and he could hear despair and fear in their words. But the writer remembered well that this was definitely not in his book, because he had told everything before and it ended, so he could have missed something. The young man heard two voices in which Saren spoke. One of them really belonged to her and she tried to fight off the demon, but he was stronger and wanted to humiliate her further. It was a terrifying sight for him, but the girl tried to fight the demon that had taken her over on her own. Then he remembered the moment when he touched her hand, and a spark of electricity passed between them. Then the young man attributed it all to divine energy. Perhaps a part of it remained in Serena's body and is now helping her not to disappear from this world completely. If he's right, then Jungmin's blows will help her come back, even though they will hurt. It's a chance to grab hold of, and there's no need to wait, because at any moment she can completely turn into a demonic being. So the guy decided to start right away. He was nervous and afraid not to hurt her even more, but if this was the way to keep Karen alive, he was willing to take the risk and use the dive skill on Michael Condor. His plan might have worked, but the skill was disallowed because he didn't have enough mana to use it, even though he hadn't fought to do so. For the demon, it was the perfect moment to destroy his enemy, because now the young man will be unable to do anything without his power and will no longer interfere with the transformation. Jongmin felt terrible again, angry with himself for becoming powerless at a really necessary and crucial moment and not being able to help even those closest to him when they really need it. However, as soon as he said this, the pastor of the 7 heroes he had invented gave him his power, after which my boy began to recover rapidly. Jongmin didn't know why Prina was helping him so much and why she had made this decision now, but he was extremely grateful to her. Now her help is needed more than ever, and without wasting any more time, the boy was able to apply his diving skills. After that, the light energy of prana appeared around him. Using this light power, the boy began to expel the demon from Saren, directing all the energy to him. Now it was his last hope, and Jongmin hoped that for the second time his spell would work and his friend would return to the world. This time it really worked and the energy began to spread rapidly through Saren's body. She must have been in pain herself, but the demon could not tolerate such intense pain. The chaos around him was even greater than it had been before, and he found himself among Saren's memories spinning around him. Later, he felt weak and under a lot of pressure because all these memories began to consume him and erase him from the face of the earth. After how many seconds, when the darkness disappeared and the boy opened his eyes, he realized that he was in a prison of the soul in Saren's mind. Without waiting a moment, the writer went inside and saw a demonic hand holding the girl's body. The girl was not conscious now, and the young man ran to her as fast as he could, trying to wake her up. After his screams, Saren barely opened her eyes and looked at Jongmin with tired eyes. It was almost over because the demon almost pulled her in, but the young man quickly started running to her and held out his hand to his friend. She tried to grab him, but failed because the demon's hand pulled her up sharply. Jongmin jumped up and finally, they were able to take each other's hand. He held it as tightly as he could because he knew that if he let go, he would not be able to save her anymore. When he held her hand, the light energy passed through Saren's body and she began to regain consciousness, and the demon left her. The demon was incredibly angry when the boy again prevented him from waking up and destroying further. Saren's body began to decay, and the demon screamed very loudly while Jongmin was still holding her hand. The demon almost completely left the girl's body, even though Saren herself was in great pain while this was happening. For a few minutes, he had to listen to these screams, but Jongmin was able to do it. He managed to save his friend and exorcise the demon from her. It worked, and not only did it bring Saren back to life, but all the souls of these lost people will also return to the bodies of their owners. He defeated the demon with a spell, but he was still most concerned about Saren, so he ran to the girl's lying body. When I turned her on her back and checked her pulse, I realized that the adventurer was alive and then breathed a sigh of relief. Now, all that remains is to destroy what's left of the demon. This ball looked even more disgusting than he had imagined, but he had to deal with it, so he approached it closer. The demon's body became so horrible again, and he started screaming that Jongmin had stripped him of his flesh and ordered him to return it. Although the boy thought that it was almost over and that it would be easy to defeat this orb, the demon still hadn't lost its powers and attacked Jongmin. But now, the young man was not afraid of anything. For some reason, he was confident that he would win, and he always had someone to support him. The young man was about to activate the tutor again, but suddenly Yuna appeared in front of him and stood in front of him, defending her friend. She was wearing an adventurer's uniform and turned to him to ask if he was okay, and the girl came just in time. Jongmin was certainly not feeling well, but he was surprised by Yuna's arrival and asked how she ended up here. She said that she saw souls gathering here, so she ran after them, but she did not understand what was happening. Later, she saw Saren lying unconscious and began to worry about her and asked Jongmin about it all. But at that moment, Yuna let her guard down and found herself with her back to the danger, which made her vulnerable. Only Jongmin screamed as the monster began to attack. Luckily, Yuna reacted quickly and applied a measured interference while turning back and directed her force at the monster. It altered its characteristics and continued to destroy it with its power. A few seconds later, she finished the spell and cut the big ball in half. Yuna, as always, did everything professionally and quickly, but for a moment even fear gripped her, because the monster attacked her unexpectedly from behind. She was already calmer, but the calmness disappeared again when Yuna noticed that the creature was still alive and that it had grown even larger. Jungmin looked frightened at the demon, who, as it turned out, could regenerate with mana, and the only way to win was to find a force that could exceed his recovery speed, but he really didn't know who could do that. And the demon kept saying that he needed a body and then started attacking again. In another room, Amol and Pom-chun continued to fight, and the old man, though still alive, was still unable to reach his students and did not know what was wrong with them. The apostle was about to strike again when the demon came and spoke again about the flesh he wanted. Then something strange began to happen, and the professor stood behind me, confused, watching. The demon had just destroyed his own ally, and after that there was no longer any doubt about his madness, but Pom-chun still did not know their motives. But the professor knew that he had to get out of its clutches and find students who were also in danger and struggling now. Now, Amol had already disappeared from his usual account, but this entity had possessed him, and now this demon looked much larger, about 20 meters in height. But it doesn't matter, because the bigger it is, the more pleasant it will be for Pom-chun to destroy it. The mana of lightning was discovered, borrowed from the god of thunder Zeus. The professor used his skills and said that he would destroy the demonic creature with a single blow. The demon himself was curious to see what lightning mana could do and wanted to try it out for himself. Pom-chun was confident in his abilities and believed that he would win with his power, so he concentrated all his mana in one area. He was saving his energy to attack when the demon attacked him, and at that moment the creature was already approaching. He felt uneasy watching the monster approach so close, but he knew he had to wait for the right time to strike as hard as possible. Finally, the moment came, and Professor Pom-chun used the spear of Astrophase lightning and pushed all the energy onto the demon's flesh. Yuna and Jongmin could barely hold on when they heard this terrible explosion and closed their eyes from the bright light. In fact, Jongmin didn't expect to see anything else, because the professor was incredibly strong, but there was a high risk that the situation would worsen right now. If things turn even a little bit wrong, he will simply become an appetizer for this monster. Sometimes the professor's mana only saturated the energy of the demonic creature. He was going to take away absolutely all of his power, and the demon only became stronger after each attack by Master Pom-chun. The professor did not expect that his own mana would saturate this demon with energy, and he instantly stopped the attack and then tried to dodge the attacks. The demon kept trying to attack the man, but he kept dodging its blows and moving away. But at the same moment, he saw that the creature was self-destructing, and it did not start after he struck it, because now he was not attacking the monster. Jongmin stared at the master in shock as he watched his actions, but when he saw the demon begin to fall apart before his eyes, the master's power worked. Now it would be good to add in a monster that would finally blow up, so the guy went up to Yuna, who was still watching the battle in amazement, and told her about it. He asked her to use her most powerful spell so that the blow would be even stronger, and they would be able to defeat the enemy faster. The young man didn't explain anything. He just asked me to trust him and use my strength. And when he gave the signal, I would just attack with all my might. The girl prepared to attack and immediately used her most powerful spell, the one Jongmin had spoken about, but it was too fast. The speed of the mana calculation was simply incredible, and he was becoming more and more fascinated by this girl, but in the end it was not surprising since Yuna was the best and strongest student of the academy. And now it was his turn, so the young man turned to the bracelet to show the strongest skill to use in the Age of Destruction. Initially, there were more than 200 results, but later they began to decrease sharply, and eventually came to one, and a skill was established that he can apply now, after which the information began to be transferred to the user's brain. This feeling was really strange because everything was transferred to his brain to the smallest detail. Michael at that moment dared to apply the divine formula, and it also helped a lot. I closed my eyes, trying to concentrate specifically on my energy and the skill I was going to use, and after how many seconds I started the harmony of the force. Now these are the best skills he can use with the 30% of divine power he still has left. Of course, there were high chances that he would not survive, but he had to try. Right now, Jongmin was ready to do absolutely anything to help get rid of the monster, because after all, he still felt guilty for creating all this himself and for the people he loved suffering because of him. Immediately upon his signal, Yuna used the full power of her strength and directed it at the monster. At the last moment, the girl called out to the master and told him to move away so as not to hit him during his attack. He abruptly pulled back and moved away, after which there was a large explosion and everything caught fire. Only the growl of a demon could be heard in all this chaos. Jongmin was going to sanctify his soul in order to get rid of the demon that had taken over. This is exactly what he is doing now, even though it is a rather tedious process, and he was already well aware of all the possible consequences, but he tried to do everything in his power. Yuna also stood back at this point, mesmerized by this unique skill she had never heard of before. The girl had never really seen anything like what her friend was using until then. The demon continued to shout very loudly and in many voices, saying that he did not want to die, saying that his flesh should be left untouched. The master himself was surprised to see that his student had wrapped his mana in divine power, and although he knew the kid's abilities, he still didn't believe that Jongmin was capable of such a thing. And then the professor remembered what happened when they got into the dungeon and the young man also used his skills. After that, he almost died, and now he also overdid it. His condition was critical, and the master immediately ran to his student. However, Jongmin really knew the risks he was taking and consciously chose this path. But when the professor finally got to him, he saw that the guy was fine and standing on his own 2 feet. Now he was actually okay, only his head hurt a bit and he was tired, but he was not injured or hurt. He also noticed that he had used big moves 3 times and wondered why he hadn't been penalized for it. At first, Yuna didn't understand what they were talking about, but the master just laughed and said that everything was fine. Only after his statements did he realize that he should watch his language better and think before he speaks. It took only a few seconds, but at that moment Jongmin's condition worsened and he seemed to evaporate from this world. When the young man looked at his hands, he was horrified. He was afraid of what might happen and screamed loudly, looking at the master and his friend. They were also shocked, but they didn't know what to do about it. After all, it was something Jongmin had said before that it could end badly for him. Eden continued to watch the boy through the screen and was shocked that this idiot decided to use mana along with divine power, which was Prina's skill, but unlike her, Jongmin had much less power. It seems that this young man is quite knowledgeable about this if he wrote it off as a mere coincidence. Of course, Eden knew that this guy was special from the very beginning, but he had no idea that Jongmin would be able to turn a demon back into a human, because that requires very strong skills. But as mentioned earlier, this can lead to a terrible result for the user, and Eden understood perfectly well where it all leads to, and Jongmin will soon disappear from this world. He used a force that exceeded his limits many times over, and the Tower Lord mentally called him a complete idiot for taking such a risk. Eden sighed and said that he had had a lot of fun and pleasure spending time with Jongmin, but that it seemed like it was time to say goodbye. However, after a few more seconds, Eden opened his eyes because of Yuna and Pomchun's screams, and then he saw that the boy was okay. For some reason, he was fine now and standing upright. Then Eden turned to Prina, who had to hear him now, so he immediately asked her a single question. I don't understand why she saved Jongmin, and why. She was surprised to hear that, because she didn't think Eden would want him to end up like that. The young man had really used his skills 3 times, which were at the limit of his strength, and he was between life and death. Then Prina asked what he was talking about, but Eden said that the girl would understand everything when Jongmin was sent to the 2nd floor of his tower. She mimicked his words, which made Eden frown because it was crossing the line. In the end, he just wanted to forget about it. There were too many thoughts about what happened and what he saw. Prina spoke again, saying that she knew about his experiences, even though Eden had asked her to stop because he was uncomfortable talking about it. In the end, everyone knew that the 1st floor of the tower was made impenetrable, and all this was to ensure that no one could get to the 2nd floor. But Jongmin became the user who was able to pass the 1st floor, and now Eden is inviting him to the next one. Maybe Eden didn't want to admit it, or at least talk about it, but Prina thought this guy was very much worthy of moving to the next floor of the impenetrable tower. Now, Jongmin himself was shocked by what was happening and why he was still in perfect health. And Prina continued to talk to Eden about what the future might hold for this guy who was capable of using such force. That's when Eden really decided that he would bring him here, and that's when he invited Jongmin to the 2nd floor of the Swordmaster Tower. In the end, Jongmin naturally accepted the invitation, and the 2nd floor of the tower was a quiet, albeit poor, place. The younger brother showed his sister a small piece of bread he had picked up from the ground, and then they decided that this would be their lunch because it was really hard to find more food here. The girl sat down next to him, and the younger man immediately offered to divide the bread in half so that they could both eat at least a little. When the brother and sister decided to eat something, they noticed something very strange next to them, and the girl looked in the direction where she heard the sound. The younger one was very frightened and threw himself into her arms when, in addition to the strange sound, they also saw an incredibly bright light. It was Jongmin, who came to this tower at the invitation of its owner, and when everything cleared, he looked around, not realizing where he was. Although the guy was the author of the novel and had written every detail to perfection, he could not yet understand what kind of place he had arrived at. When I saw these two, I was afraid, although my sister and brother were even more afraid of him and were already thinking of running away from here, but Jongmin asked me what I was doing. Then I received another message from Eden saying that the sword that cuts through the horizon had invited Jongmin to the floor of the rotten ghetto tower, which was actually a very unexpected invitation. The sister defended her brother and cautiously asked him who he was and how he came to be here, and the young man was very surprised when the girl called him sir. The system found a character who existed in a real setting, so it started looking for more information about him and eventually read about his brother Jack, who is 11, and sister Leia, who is 15. Then Jongmin thought about these two characters from his story. The kid also looked at him without trust for a while, but then Jack handed Jongmin some water and asked him if he was still hungry. Then he sat down next to them, and he felt very embarrassed that he had to take something from these people because they had almost nothing themselves. Jongmin took what the younger man gave him, but he didn't think it was even possible to eat it, or at least he was worried that there would be some consequences after drinking it. He decided to take a chance and took a sip, but immediately spat it out and found out that he had just taken a moss tea, which gave him mild poisoning. It was so horrible and tasteless, and there would be side effects, but Jack yelled at his uncle not to spit it out under any circumstances. He just took the kid's tea and didn't drink it himself, and that was all the water they had managed to collect. That's why the boy decided to help them, and the brother and sister were very surprised when Jongmin was able to get fresh meat from his bracelet. The young man wanted to apologize to them and make amends, because he felt bad for taking their last water. Then Jongmin handed them food. The brother and sister sincerely thanked their savior for such a large amount of food. They threw themselves at the meat and started eating it with their hands, even though it was very strange for Jongmin, at least because the meat was very hot. But Jack and Leah were so hungry that they didn't care about such trifles. Then the young man told them not to worry and not to eat in a hurry because he had more and was ready to share it with them. Then the girl asked Jongmin why he wasn't eating anything, but she called him Mister for the second time, and he felt even more uncomfortable but said he was just not hungry. Then Jongmin picked up the bread they had eaten and told them not to do it again, because it was completely spoiled and could easily make them sick. Later, the guy asked if they lived here alone, and Jack and Leah said that there were only 3 of them and one other person, and everyone was Eden's, but the little one said he had left a long time ago, but his brother Pabul would come and play with them sometimes. Jongmin couldn't say where or when, but he had definitely heard this name somewhere, and it seemed painfully familiar. The younger man eagerly began to tell the stranger absolutely everything he asked, but Leia began to suspect something and asked why he needed such information. But Jongmin said he was just worried about them, and then he held out the food again and told them to eat more and get stronger. Then the young man got up and went somewhere, and when Jack asked where he was going, he said he had to go to the restroom for a minute. He left his brother and sister alone by the fire and barely made it to the toilet because his stomach hurt so much after that terrible moss tea. Of course, Jongmin was incredibly grateful to Eden for inviting him to his second-floor apartment, but he wished he could just leave the place as soon as possible. Especially since he had a lot of unfinished business in the real world, he should have taken Saren to the hospital as soon as possible to see if she was okay. And when the young man didn't hear any answer a second later, he got angry and shouted for Eden to let him out of here immediately because he shouldn't be here at all and he needed to go back to Earth. No matter how much the guy asked him, Eden rejected his request and didn't even say anything. Only then did a sign appear that Jongmin should go to the second floor immediately. It's easy to go crazy because everyone will be worried that he disappeared and didn't say anything, and you don't know how long he'll have to stay in this damn tower because Eden doesn't want to let him go. Eden had so many thoughts in his head that he was scared, but Jongmin still tried to get him to let him go home. The boy was on his knees and holding his head when a man approached him and allegedly brought him back to consciousness. When the young man looked up at him, he realized that he was very angry that a stranger was playing with these children. He saw that this stranger was a foreigner, and then some other people armed with small daggers approached the young man. Jongmin also did not know who they were because he remembered absolutely nothing about these people, but he could see that the people of this place were very hostile to him. Perhaps it was simply because he was a stranger, and even old people whose bodies were already trembling joined this small group to kill the stranger. Jongmin was sure that this episode would end when Eden left the city, because it was at this point that the writer himself put an end to it, but it turned out that everything continued to live its own life. Jongmin decided to be more friendly and began to speak gently to the residents, saying that he was confident that they could do it again peacefully without any weapons.